and it is deemed as being suitable for drinking. But to do so, they've had to put in chlorine to keep it disinfected all the way to where you are, because chlorine has a long residual time in the pipework. And so therefore, from time to time, they get the mixture wrong, because there's people using a lot of water some days on a hot day, then they don't use so much. So it's quite difficult to actually fine tune the amount of chlorine. So they tend to overdose, and sometimes if you have a shower, you'll smell the chlorine, or you boil a kettle of water and make some tea, and it tastes awful because the chlorine's gone up. So we ozonate all our water now for our house, even though it has been proved to be absolutely perfect for drinking. We have to start to learn from nature and use nature to find the solutions. And we might err incorrectly, not have a very good yield. Then we would have to go back again and rebalance. It's not going to be a one-off, get it right the first time. But if we take England now, they finally are going to allow the use of pesticides, because they were told that if you don't use it, you're going to lose your crops. Well, that's almost like putting a gun to the government's head. You're going to lose your crops, and the people are going to starve. But where's the third solution, the third option? In everything, there's always many options. Use the pesticide, or don't use the pesticide, or use only some of the pesticide in lowland. And I think it would have been appropriate for the government to say, well, okay, you say we're going to lose our crops, but let us legislate that in 1 or 2 counties they will use no pesticide. Plant ordinarily, and if there's a failure, the government will come to the party and say, look, we made a mistake. We will recompense the farmer, so that the farmer's not taking the brunt of it. And then you run that parallel, and you see, well, that county, they used pesticide. This county, they didn't use pesticide. Oh my goodness, they didn't lose the crop. Then you have an ability to do the measuring. And then maybe another county, you say, well, now 50% of the crop. So you balance out until you find, and you minimize and minimize and minimize. But right now, it's an all or nothing, and they get scared to hell about this, and so virtually a gun is held to the head of the decision makers. And even though there were some 200 scientific papers presented to prove that this wouldn't happen, the decision that Britain took, very, very worryingly, is to carry on and use the pesticide. If we go back to nature and you look at a simple tree and how it transpires and it draws water, transpires, and it creates a whole system of continuity. All the time we are breaking this continuity down. We are very deft as humans to break nature's continuity. And we need to go back again and look at re-establishing nature's continuity. And so if we look at the cry, well, we had to do this because we got to feed the millions or the billions. You take that at face value to start off with and say, well, fine, but then we need to also take an area and start to re-establish what was removed from there. And that is where Luke was explaining with his seeds, for instance, how that can be done. Global warming or not, the weathers are changed. It's warming. Even there's an article now given on the effect of El Nino that's going to have on the whole of southern Africa. Zimbabwe is a basket case from a food point of view, total basket case. Zambia is similar. South Africa is going to be hit by El Nino. And this is likely to happen for the next 6 to 8 months. That is going to happen. It might last longer, even into 18 months they're worried about. Now, El Nino is not a new thing. It's happened cyclically over goodness knows how long go back. And that energy that El Nino has, where the water temperature in the ocean is maybe a half a degree higher than it would normally be, but is spread over such an enormous area, represents so much energy that we can't even begin to calculate how much of an engine that is in driving the weather. I spoke to someone a couple of years ago about El Nino, and I figured out that it was actually very shallow. I thought it was only maybe a meter of water, maybe deeper, 1.5 meters. And he said to me, no, the water can be 30 or 40 meters deep, and it can stretch from here all the way to Australia. So you imagine a stretch of water the size of one of the oceans that suddenly has its temperature changed by half a degree, and you had to say, well, let's generate the electricity and warm that ocean up. It's an amount of energy that we can't even begin to comprehend. And when that energy is released, as it is on our weather patterns, that's going to happen. So the natural effects of warming have been around for a long, long time. The corals show us that. There's plenty of evidence of that. So tackling global warming and so on and so forth, I think, has to be done in a number of facets. We know that the carbon dioxide is the major issue, and that has to be reduced dramatically. But right away, I would believe that I would start a whole process of planting, slowly but surely, in the rural areas, and reclaiming. Even if you had to reclaim a half a kilometer of that desert advance in 1 year, that would be an enormous gain. And over a period of years, the effects would start to happen. And there would be a change. The cooling would happen. The trees would create a cooling for the farming community in the vineyards. And I got a call from a very well-known farm. They had decided to put up a piggery and use the water that they used to wash out the stalls for nutrient for their vineyards. And I think they had 400 pigs. And it was beautifully laid out. I mean, it really was. They were all on clean as a whistle, and there was this great big tank that would tip and flush through underneath their stalls, and all that water went into a container, and it had a belt which took away the hairs, and that water was then put into a tanker, and they went around their vines, and they actually fed this water to their vineyards. And of course, the vineyards blossomed like you wouldn't believe. But of course, eventually they had too much, so they found the farmer next door. How about, would you like a tanker or two? It'll cost you that? Yeah, sure. They were tankering it to their farmers across, but then it was more. And eventually they figured out, well, it was now time to put up a system to treat. You are not allowed to take anything out there. You will have to treat all the water on this place. And that was just because of not even going to buy phosphate and nitrates from the chemical company. This was just out of there. I then found out that the 400 pigs created as much nutrient as 12,000 humans. So we dug this whole place out, and they got to treat it and restored the whole issue. And it took a long, long time, lots of rainfalls, seasons thereafter, to leach that extra nutrient out, and for the grasses to start to regrow again and actually consume it before it ended up in the Berg River. So here was a very innocent, wonderful plan to fertilize naturally some vineyards. We're not going to go and buy the chemicals, whatever they were. We're going to use nature's own nutrient to do it. And that flipped right over. It completely flipped its lid. And that was an absolute eye-opener. I mean, I really did think hard that could happen, but I saw it. It was as obvious as can be. And of course the pH also changed. And at that time, they did a very interesting experiment of just what pH will do to growth. Nothing else. Nitwa Bay is the testing, the laboratory where they do a lot of the research on vineyards and stuff like that. And they had a farmer's day, and what they had done, they had a little series of little punnets, these little flat punnets that you get at the nursery, and they had planted grasses in them. And they had a long table, and behind the table they had numbers. So and these were pH, from acidic going to neutral and going to alkaline. And each punnet, it's just grass growing in it, and each punnet was watered with the acidic or alkaline level pH representative of the number on the wall. And it was staggering, Judy. At the acidic end and the alkaline end, the grass was so high. And as you look, there was this natural graph, how the grasses got taller and taller and taller until neutral, and then got shorter and shorter and shorter again. It was the most poignant absolutely clear graph that you could possibly imagine. There's no way you could actually even explain that in a class as poignantly as that. It was there, and the farmers looked and said, "May matter." They couldn't believe that this was so blatantly obvious. And how simple is it for you to take a sample of your soil and test it for pH? Not a big deal. So that started a lot of things rolling, and I remember Boerland Coetzee at that time at the farm Kanonkop, and he was advised to put about 5 tons of lime, agricultural lime, into the soil before he planted. He did the deep ploughing. And he said no, he was going to put in 25 tons. And they said, "No, you're crazy, you can't put in 25 tons, that's ridiculous." No, he said, "I'm going to put in 12.5 tons of dolomitic lime and 12.5 tons of calcitic lime. The calcitic lime will break down quickly, and the dolomitic lime will break down when my children will reach 20, because it takes a long time to do that." So it was his farm, do what he wants to. And we ploughed it, and we applied the lime. You want to go back again and look at those vineyards. They are absolutely stunning. And all he did was to look and create a pH environment for his vines to grow in. So those were some experiments and some very, very, they're very poignant examples of what, and how simple, if we just look at the pH. We worry about pouring and, lots and lots of nutrient, but we actually don't take the soil and say, well, let's see, what pH is it? And you can get a pH test kit. These are not difficult, they're not expensive. But if we simply went to the soil and did a pH test, we'd say, oh, okay, this is funny, this is very acidic. Maybe we'll just fix it and bring it back to neutral. You haven't put any pesticide in there, or sorry, any nutrient on it. We just changed it with lime or whatever to bring it up, and the plants just, away they go. Because nature doesn't do that. Plants will grow where the soil is ideal, and where it isn't ideal, you say, well, why are these trees not growing here? Oh, let's check the soil. And I had some interesting work in the UAE, and our a chap that came up there, he checked the soil, and he could look at leaves and he'd tell you straight away, well, this plant is lacking substance in the soil. And we take the soil samples away to the laboratory, and blow me down, exactly what he said was what was missing. Things like boron. There was not sufficient boron in the soil. We know that soils are broken into 3 different components. You have your sandy soils, so you have your loams, and you have your clays. And here, of course, we have predominantly sandy soils, as you know, in the Cape. So the farmers on the Cape are pouring nutrient into this basic filter. It's just like sand, and it's disappearing into the underground water stream, and it's just all over the show. But it's residual time that is actually where the root zone is so short that they keep on pouring at the top, and the poor old plant just consumes a little bit, and then it's gone. It's away. So again, the way that is being applied, and so forth, and the best thing is to add more and more humus to the soil and try and get it more towards the middle point, the more like the loams. I think in about 1966, 67, I was doing work on Marina da Gama, and that soil was really, really bad, and they sent that off to the US for testing. And the report came back that this was possibly the worst soil that they'd ever tested. And they didn't know what to do to it other than to put lots and lots and lots of plant material into it. And so the chipping of trees came into being, and the big chippers were used, and put in as much humus into that as you can. And that corrected it. And
as you know, bleaching is happening across the Great Barrier Reef. And they are losing kilometers of reef due to bleaching. Now before, it was always thought because of the increase in temperature of the upper water, and this is causing the bleaching. But what they found out is that the reef as a living organism, this is something we should actually be concerned about, because if you think about it, the Great Barrier Reef is like the mother of the ocean. It is like the estuary of the ocean. It is the heart of the ocean. Life breeds from the Great Barrier Reef like you have no idea. But the point is that the reef this is not the first time the reef has gone through kind of heating events and cooling events, but it has certain methods in which it protects itself. So what it does is they have like a trial run, okay? So the reef will basically send information to the top part of the reef saying, prepare for heat. And then the in ocean acidification at the top of the water, or there'll be an increase in temperature. But because that increase is not disappearing, because the increase is just perpetual, the reef is bleaching itself, it is dying, because we have basically fundamentally, permanently altered the atmospheric chemistry, and that is what's causing the bleaching. You know, this if you think about the incredibleness of the Great Barrier Reef, you know, we talk about the extinction of certain species, but the Great Barrier Reef is a massive, large living species that has survived for thousands, perhaps millions of years, and we, in the short space of just 20 years, are destroying it. 20 years. Now the scary part for me, and I'm going to round this up quickly, but the scary part for me is this, is that we already know that if tomorrow, let's say for argument's sake tomorrow, everybody decided, well look, I'm not driving, all carbon dioxide emitting places said, look, we're going to cut carbon. We already know that the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere will impact the atmosphere for at least 10 to 15 years before there is any significant drop in global part per million counts of carbon dioxide. So that means that even if we stopped everything bad today, the Great Barrier Reef is going to experience 10 to 15 years still of the conditions at itself, which may
just kill it off.
Already be enough to kill it off entirely. It may be enough that even if we were to stop everything right now, that it may be enough to wipe it out. So we are actually sitting on maybe the world's largest extinction event outside of the KT meteor impact. We could actually be looking at potentially the death of the ocean's mother. And that's what we're doing. Because to be honest, do you really think that tomorrow we're not going to drive? Do you think tomorrow that we're not going to make more carbon dioxide? Bearing in mind that on Wednesday that study came out affecting how growth is starting to affect resource base and sustainability. I mean, think about it. That's just a study that's come out. It's going to take years to convince the greedy, money-hungry corporations and government that runs this place. It's going to take them years before they even start to get the idea into their head to stop screwing up the environment. But the fact is it's not. And more than likely, in my opinion, I'm a very logical person, there is an extreme probability that unless there are some unknown kind of mechanisms for stress tolerance in the Great Barrier Reef, there is an extreme probability that what we have just done is wiped out the heart of the ocean. And it's going to happen. There's very little we're going to do to be able to stop it. So, I don't want to leave you on a down note. This is World Recycling Week. I really hope that you have taken some time. You've done your part in terms of recycling. I know it's not easy. It's not a pleasant thing to do. It's difficult and it's irritating, but you have to do it. We just have to do it. We have to try.
Renewable energy laws and legislation, in which we have stated clearly that developing renewable energy and new energy will be our priorities.
在本世纪头10年，中国在可再生能源发展上已经走得比较快。
In the first decade of this century, China have achieved a lot in developing renewable energy and new energy.
我在昨天介绍中国能源发展的情况上已经讲了，中国的风电已经位居世界第2。
Yesterday, in my keynote speech, I have stated that the installed capacity of wind power in China ranked number 1 in the world.
水电呢位居世界第1。
And the installed capacity of hydropower ranks number 1 in the world.
太阳能光伏电池的这个产量已经达到这个世界的50%。
and we have half of the solar batteries around the world.
中国太阳能光伏发电的能力已经达到60万千瓦。
And the installed capacity of solar PV is about 600 megawatt.
今年到年底，我们有可能达到80万千瓦。
By the end of this year, we expect the installed capacity to increase to 800 megawatt.
太阳能热水器的利用面积，我们已经占到全世界总量的50%，也是世界第一。
And for solar water heater, we have the coverage of about half of the world coverage, ranks number 1 around the world.
第三点，我们还要在解决好安全的前提下，要积极的发展核电。
Thirdly, we will actively develop a nuclear power plant on the prerequisite of safety.
中国目前在建的核电的规模有3097万千瓦。
Currently, the nuclear power units under construction is 30.97 gigawatt,
那么这个建设规模也是世界第一。
and for the scale of construction, it also ranks number 1 around the world.
在日本福岛核事故之后，中国对建成的核电站进行了安全的评估，电站也进行了安全的评估。
After Fukushima accident, the Chinese government has carried out safety evaluation about all the nuclear power units under construction, and we also carry out an investigation on all the nuclear power units in operation.
我想你们也可能知道，中国在核电发展上在积极的和美国、和法国、和俄罗斯、和世界上核电最先进的国家进行国际合作。
And as we all know, China is actively carrying out international cooperation concerning the construction of nuclear power units with the United States, France, and Russia, with this kind of most advanced nations in nuclear field.
我们一定要用最先进的核电技术解决核电的安全问题。
And we are supposed to solve the problem of safety with the most advanced and most safe technologies.
同时呢，你也可能知道，中国的这个能源结构以煤为主，我们的煤炭、煤电占到这个发电装机的70%左右。
And in China, we have to confess that the energy mix is still coal-based, and coal-fired power plants constitute about 70% of all the power units in China.
所以中国的这个能源结构与世界的能源结构是不一样的。
Therefore, the energy mix in China is opposite with the average energy mix in the world.
世界的能源结构当中，石油、天然气占到70%左右。
In the average energy mix, oil and gas constitute about 70% of all the energy consumption.
由于中国的这种能源资源和能源结构，就决定中国今后仍然要发展火电。
Considering the current or the status quo in the energy mix in China, which is coal-based primarily, it decides that in the next phase, China will still develop its energy on the basis of coal-fired power plants.
但是我们在发展火电方面已经采取了很多积极有效的技术措施、管理措施、政策措施，促进火电厂清洁高效发展。
In the utilization of coal-fired power plants, the Chinese government has carried out a lot of active and very effective technological management and also policy measures in order to develop coal-fired power plants in a cleaner way.
第一点，我们在2005年到2010年期间，已经通过上大压小的政策，关闭7000多万千瓦的小火电机组。
From the year 2005 to 2010, we have carried out supporting the large-scale coal-fired power plants and closing down small coal-fired power plants strategy, which have retired about 76 gigawatts of small coal-fired power plants.
这种行动在世界各国都是前所未有的。
And I think this kind of activities is unprecedented around the world.
第二呢，我们通过这种上大压小，使我们国家的大机组的比重 特别是30万、60万，甚至80万、100万的火电机组，占到整个火电装机的80%左右。
Through this kind of activities and the strategic measures, we have also optimized the structure of coal-fired power plants in China. Currently, large-scale coal-fired power units, which has the installed capacity of 300 megawatt, 600 megawatt, and 800 megawatt, even 1 gigawatt has constituted about 80% of all the coal-fired power plants.
第三点，通过这种措施，我们火电厂的供电煤耗下降了20多克。现在中国全国火电厂供电煤耗达到330克千瓦时，也是接近世界先进水平。
Through this kind of effective measures, we also optimize the cost of coal in coal-fired power units. Currently, the coal consumption for per kilowatt hour of power is about 333 grams, which has been reduced by 37 grams through the 5-year plan. Currently, I think the status quo for coal-fired power plants in the respect of coal consumption is pretty advanced around the world.
第四点，我们已经要求中国的新建的火电厂都要加装脱硫、脱硝、脱氮的这种技术措施。
Fourthly, we have asked all the new rising coal-fired power plants to add desulfurization devices in their construction.
同时对老电厂进行脱硫、脱硝、脱氮的技术改造。
And at the same time, we'll also carry out desulfurization reform and upgrade for old coal-fired power plants.
那么在电价政策上，对于这些清洁环保的措施，给予一定的鼓励和支持。
As for the tariff policy, we also support the construction of cleaner and more effective coal-fired power plants.
我们欢迎世界各国的专家、能源组织到中国去参观中国的火电厂。
We welcome experts and organizations from around the world to pay visit to China's coal-fired power units.
我认为中国的火电厂在世界上来看，从管理、技术到清洁、环保，还有这个火电厂这个周围的环境，都已经是非常好的。
We believe that the coal-fired power plants in China is pretty advanced in no matter in the respect of technology and also environmental friendly and also more clean and management.
我们火电厂实行零排放。
For coal-fired power plants, we encourage the operators to carry out a zero emission strategy.
有很多火电厂就像花园工厂一样。
Some of the coal-fired power plants are like gardens.
而且我们呢，在发展火电的同时呢，还大力发展热电厂。
When we are constructing coal-fired power units, we also encourage them to carry out cogeneration.
发展天然气电厂。
And also gas-fired power plants.
发展煤层气电厂。
And utilization of coal-bed methane.
还有在要求一些大型的钢铁化工企业实行压擦余热发电。
And we also encourage the steel companies and chemical companies to utilize their redundant heat.
所以中国在优化火电方面做了很多大量的工作。
To sum up, China have achieved a lot and made painstaking efforts in optimizing the structure of coal-fired power plants.
在“12.5”能源规划当中，我们也要求火电厂要采取更加积极有效的措施，发展高效、先进、清洁的火电机组。
In the 12th Five-Year Plan, we still encourage those operators to develop high-efficient, more advanced, and much cleaner coal-fired power units.
在这里，我还要向你传递一个信息：中国 30万、60万以上的火电机组的技术指标、经济指标，在世界上都是比较先进的。
Hereby, I would also like to share this information with you that currently the status quo or the conditions and levels and criteria for 300 megawatt, 600 megawatt coal-fired power plants are performing pretty well around the world.
我们火电设备的价格性能比，在国际上都是有很强的竞争力。
And they are also cost-effective in the international market.
2010年，我们向世界各国出口火电设备1800万千瓦。
In the year 2010, we have exported the installed capacity of more than 10 gigawatt.
2011年，仍然有很多国家订购了中国的火电设备。
Hopefully, in the year 2011, we will welcome more purchase from the international market.
所以，请你放心，中国今后的火电厂会越来越干净、越来越清洁、越来越美丽。
So I can say confidently that in the next phase, China's coal-fired power plants will be much cleaner and much beautiful.
所以，欢迎你到中国参观中国的火电厂。
So I would also like to invite experts and organizations from around the world to see, to pay a visit to China's coal-fired power plants to see with your own eyes.
这是我回答你的第一个问题。
That's my answer to your first question.
Human settlement versus conservation land, and how we actually assist people like this. I think the biggest pressure of all is people that are struggling to survive. And it's a bigger pressure now because
we're advancing numbers.
yeah, and that's a bigger pressure now because the haves and the have-nots, and the more have-nots we have to support the haves, the bigger the pressure. And here's the situation, because the haves decide, they try and dictate how the have-nots should live. And this is part of the big problem that we have in the peninsula here. But let's have a look at Red Hill. It's a really sweet little settlement. It's still relatively contained, and everything around it is a national park, so it's quite relevant in terms of Cape Town. It's Cape Town situation. It's beautiful. We're here at Red Hill. It's, as you see, it's an informal settlement. But what it does represent is it represents some of the pressures that people face, and as a result of that, the environment has to deal with. I've been involved in experiential nature and cultural-based travel in Southern and East Africa for the last 25 years. And my true passion is looking at ways to assist conservation and make people aware of some of the real big issues that are facing Africa and some of the most sensitive areas. Quite a number of people live in quite stressful environments. I mean, this is actually far better than many others. Quite a few of the really significant wetlands within the peninsula are affected by this type of settlement, which is unstructured and unplanned settlement. Yeah, so just a couple of pointers in a situation like this. We have a little forest of stone pine trees. It used to be a much larger forest, but the authorities decided that they needed to chop them down, which is very unfortunate because, stone pines are not that invasive, and they also created quite a nice shelter for this settlement here. So the authorities came along and chopped down. The proteas are the most dominant of the group of plants. This is an example of a leucodendron, male and female. They've got separate plants, male and female, whereas other proteas are all male and female on the same plant. Okay.
to stop for a while? Sorry.
This is an area that hasn't burnt for probably about 20 years. And this is like, in this area, this would be the climax fynbos situation. Down here in the southwestern Cape, we have the most diverse vegetation type in all the world. Growing on the soils that formed from this Table Mountain sandstone, which is this original sedimentary rock, and also other areas where the Cape granites, which go back even further, 600 million years, have also intruded and formed very acidic soils. So in this area we have, as I mentioned earlier, we have more plants they're not found elsewhere, and there's a high level of endemism in the Cape. So, you know, too much development has a big impact on these rare plant species. This is a nice example of pristine fynbos. It's an area that hasn't been burned for quite a long while. But then on the other side there's a recent fire that happened down on the other edge there. You can see the white edge over there. That was quite a devastating fire. Fynbos needs to have fires because it helps encourage all the biodiversity, you know, because there's a succession process that would happen here. The dominant plants would disappear, and then all the pioneers would come in, and what we see as these beautiful spring flowers are all pioneer plants, and they're here to re-establish the vegetation. They're opportunistic, so whenever they see a chance, they establish themselves and they grow. They invest huge amounts in their viability to produce seed and regenerate as quickly as possible. But they're annuals, and they flower for part of the year or grow for part of the year and then disappear. But then the more dominant plants will then use that foothold to re-establish themselves. And it's a cycle of about 14 years. Destroyed all the vegetation in this area. Just a few of these protea trees that are still barely surviving. Quite amazing that you...
Will they survive?
Surviving, actually. You see it got scorched, but you see the new growth over there. It's still viable, so it will survive. You know, the situation like this where fire comes through and sweeps clean is not always negative. You know, there's it makes way for new life. Nature has an incredible way of regenerating. You know, everything can be destroyed, and slowly but surely little seeds, especially of these pioneer plants, establish themselves and then begin a whole new process of life, mainly as anchors to support other plants that become more dominant climax plants later. And I guess, you know, if one looks at life and looks at the success of humans, that does repeat itself in history. That, you know, you have these great empires that actually rise and then something causes them to crash. You know, be it war, be it environmental factors, disease, quite a few things. But life has this thing. It has this renewable energy. It comes from somewhere, and the problem is that us humans build this kind of, get ourselves to this apex point where we are in control of our world, in control of everything, and it's actually a very fragile position to be in, because there's the cycle where nature has this way of building and destroying, and our civilizations are also as vulnerable as a situation like this. So
We might just be being part of nature now, what we do.
well, the earth has this, and I mean the greatest cities in the world
are just as vulnerable. I mean, the foundations might be good, the structures and the construction might be great, but it doesn't take much. It can take an earthquake, it can take a flood or just a fire, or even man himself to destroy all of that. So we kind of invest too much of our lives in building things of materialistic value, and we attach too much connection to that. You know, it's important to find a balance in life where you know that you are satisfying your absolute needs and not having to be consumptive, and actually build these kind of these towers of grandeur and put too much attention on that value, artificial value system, because it's fragile, as fragile as this environment. But the most beautiful thing of it all is it regenerates. And it's quite significant where we are here now, because when we look at the evolution of man, it is go to venture into a bit of that. Yeah, it's incredible to see how, you know, it looked very, very bleak a while ago, but it doesn't take long. With a bit of rain and a bit of time, everything grows back, and you come back here in a month's time, you're going to have such a spectacular flower show. Into this wonderful formation of land right at the tip of Africa here. You know, we've got a place which is very unique, and I'll go into the detail of the plants later, but this is a situation where we have a dramatic coastline, you know, with these mountains and seascape, and a little bay like False Bay is also once again a very fragile system. It's an incredible biodiversity of animals that exist in extreme conditions. During the summer months we have winds that blow into this bay here, bringing in warm water, and over the winter months the wind blows in the opposite direction and blows all the warm water out of the bay, and we get pockets of what we call upwelling, where the surface water is blown away and then the deep nutrient-rich water comes up from below and replenishes that displaced water, and that brings with it the foundation of life for the ocean, which is all these organisms that have been dormant on the ocean floor, and as they get brought to the surface, where you have this, you see the rings of white along the edge of all this, the coastline is that you're seeing there is actually a plankton bloom. And those organisms are brought into the oxygen-rich water, and they suddenly burst into life. And that's the pyramid of the lower part of the pyramid of life that supports this incredible fish reserve and marine biodiversity. So that would what we refer to as the plant version, the phytoplankton, the plant plankton. And then as that food drifts out into this area here, which is mainly the coastline is really made up of pretty cool water. You know, the average temperature is about 12 degrees, so it ranges from really, really cold sometimes to even below 10 degrees, and then it can rise up to about 20 degrees depending on the wind. But this area supports an incredible pelagic reserve of fish, and this plant plankton then eventually gets fed on by the zooplankton, which are the jellyfish and the floating component of plankton, and a bit of krill and all that. And then the other group of fish which live off that, mainly filter feeding fish and anchovies and sardines and mackerel and all that, are then the next level. Great schools and concentrations of that exist off the Cape. Very, very fragile, what they call bait fish reserve. And that would then support the incredible game fish that seasonally exist off the coast here. So the problem is that it's all good and well that nature's supporting itself in a great balance until somebody comes along with a huge net and just trawls that entire pelagic shoal away. And the Cape is very vulnerable in that way. It's quite accessible to fishing vessels. I mean, there's good harbours and good technology, and very soon a fleet of trawlers could discover a shoal of fish. They use all sorts of methods of locating them these days. They use satellite technology. They're able to use they've got various sonars that aren't just like that don't just scan the ocean floor below the boat. They're able to use horizontal sonars where they're actually able to extend the range of the sonars way beyond the old traditional methods, so they can locate shoals of fish from far away and very strategically bring in a whole team of trawlers and actually take everything. So it is a big issue for us. It is one of the richest fishing grounds in the world. In terms of biodiversity, the South African coastline, which is 3,000 kilometers long, represents the second largest diversity of families of fish in the world. So from the very warm tropical coastline up on the border of Mozambique, all the way to the really cold and rugged coastline of the border of Namibia. So it's a huge range, and within that range, you've got the pelagic fish, which are the ones that very much occur off this coastline, which live in the cold water, which is the Benguela current. And then on the east coast, we've got fish that are reef fish. So they're a bit more vulnerable in terms of exploitation, because they don't easily regenerate themselves. Because once a reef has been destroyed, it's very hard to kind of build the viability of that reef back again. But a place like False Bay, as I said, it's a place where we've got enormous number of fish that are able to withstand that range of temperatures, that are also very localized, as it's some of the fish up on the tropical areas. And within this bay, we've got quite a number of fish that are endemic only to this area, mainly amongst what we refer to them as the little sand sharks, the smaller reef sharks. False Bay is unfortunately quite protected. They don't allow any trawling in the bay here, and the type of fishermen that operate in the area are mainly the traditional fishermen from Cork Bay, who are line fishermen, and a couple of sports anglers. But there are still, in the bay, there are a number of areas which are regarded as breeding sites for cob and for steenbras, and those areas are unfortunately still permit dragnet fishing. So quite often fish that come in to spawn and breed happen to fall within the range of these gill net or land-based net fishermen, and they're coming down the coast, pushing up the coast from the sub-Antarctic. We have a countercurrent that comes from the other side, and that countercurrent is usually warm water, and that's where all the predatory fish live. And then you have the bait fish within the colder water. Now that's an area that the trawlers target, because it supports quite a biodiversity of fish, mainly the hake and kingklip. The problem with the trawl is non-specific. They basically create this huge wall of net, and they just trawl everything within range of that. And it takes everything. There's a huge amount of bycatch. It doesn't quite scrape. Bycatch is non-target fish. It could be fish. It could be mammals. It could be dolphins. It could be anything that happens to be in the path of that net is taken. And those nets trawl for 3 hours. And once they pull it out, everything, the contents of that net gets dropped into a hold, and then it gets processed. So in the time of being trawled for 3 hours and then being thrown out of the water into this big cargo hold and then being processed, most of the animals don't survive. So what would happen then is the fishing company would just take out the the viable fish, and the rest would just be thrown out the back. There are quite a few other techniques of fishing beyond, other than the trawling, is the long lining. And the long lining is a matter of having a long rope with multiple lines with hooks which are baited, and it's also quite non-target because they might be looking to catch what they call the normal lionfish by baiting for kingklip and for hake, but they catch quite a number of sharks in the process as well, and those fish don't survive. Other problem with that is the number of seabirds that are actually attracted to this fishing operation. So you've got albatrosses, and you've got shearwaters, and all the incredible flocks of pelagic birds out there that actually follow these fishing vessels, and quite a few of them get dive as the ropes are recovered. The long liners, with each rope with its whole series of hooks, and the quite often albatrosses that actually get impaled on the hooks and brought out. So we lose a lot of albatrosses in the process of that. So talking about bycatch, these animals all suffer as a consequence of this fishing operation.
Some people would say that the effect of dropping so much dead fish that is just not the one that they wanted over the edge could mean a lot of food for other fish. Is this indeed what happens?
It is. It's one of the most. I mean, it's quite a significant thing to be around a boat that's pulling a net or lifting a long line, because it does attract everything. I mean, it's for a fisherman. If you're a tuna fisherman, it's probably one of the best places to catch a fish, because the predatory fish know this. They're conditioned already to know that when a trawler lifts a net, that there's going to be a reward or two. So do the birds. So that's true, but the thing is that there's just so much they can eat, and the rest is just pure wastage. It's just a loss of unnecessary life. Man is polluting quite a few of these coastal areas with the sewage situations, and quite a few of the rivers in Cape Town that have been previously quite polluted have also had quite an effect on the estuaries and the coastline. But I think the bigger problem in the rock lobster industry is that they're using a very, very the method of catching lobsters utilizes what they call a trap, which is a huge basket-like box, which has got two funnels on either side. And the problem is that these fishermen often put these traps out on very, very bad weather days, because they're forced they have a pressure to catch a certain number of quota within a certain time frame. So they do expose themselves to some extreme conditions, and in the process lose these nets. And once this net is lost, it continues for almost infinity until that net actually disintegrates, continually catching everything through that funnel system. So they might have started out and had a trap full of crayfish, but those crayfish rot and attract other crayfish. So there's more destruction by them losing one of those nets than probably by them just fulfilling their quota. And if you go onto the western side of the peninsula, you'll just see beaches littered with those traps. I mean, I count up to about 30, 40 at the moment in the reserve. And just try and think back of when they might have lost that, and what a process of killing that net has gone through until it eventually found its way onto the beach. They should prevent operators from using those.
Man is impacting the planet everywhere, and one of the big problems that is happening is potentially with global warming. They're anticipating a man-made, man-induced heating of the planet, and thus rising the sea levels because of the melting ice. What impact would that have, in your opinion, on, I mean, can you sort of foresee how it might unwind at the process? Up goes the sea level, let's say, give it 2 meters. how that changed things for anybody, for anything.
Well,
Good or
if
bad?
you're talking about the marine environment,
Mostly, but and coastal.
well, I think it will certainly impact on man, because man is really, wherever possible, try to develop their best position along the coast. You know, in terms of it's become a very valuable, highly sought after residential asset. So I think man has probably ventured a little bit too far in terms of nature's boundaries, and I think that is just a bit of an oversight, because the environment is constantly going through change, and you know the earth has its cycles, and the cycles have existed forever. In a place like False Bay, for quite a bit of its existence, it was actually dry land. It's not a very deep bay, and at some part of it was a dunescape. So every 30 to 40,000 years, we've had this process of sea level rise and fall. It's a dynamic process. Our kind of history is quite limited in terms of timescale, as opposed to what the Earth's timescale is. But for me personally, I think it's more man's impact on
It's a little bit different now
really
because-
physical things, tangible things, and it has been.
Has it?
Yeah.
Completely icebound, like a snowball.
Not completely locked up, and that's why the Cape is rather different from other areas, and that's why we have such a diverse vegetation type, because some parts of the world are relatively ice-free, even during that great chill. There are two schools. You obviously got the scientists that have their... You know, we live in a society where everything is about finding a mechanism of survival, and even scientists have to find a mechanism of survival. And if they can come up with a good theory to support their situation as a scientist, then they're sustaining themselves. And if that theory is to promote the idea that we're going through a time of stress, that global warming is a major impact, then it does create a bit of a public hype, and it does get people on board to help them support their research, because it becomes then a sustainable opportunity for that scientist. And there are two schools. That somebody might have a different theory, and whoever puts the right theory together, because there are many explanations for these environmental effects. One can actually put it down to much more than just pure global warming. And it also depends on, like, you know, how people are lobbied, and how the political support kind of rallies around certain issues, and the way that they can get people on board to achieve their end. You know, there's a great amount of support for anything where one raises a level of fear amongst people. When their security is compromised, if their well-being is stressed, they will always find mechanisms to try and discount their stress situation on something, which is most often bigger issues like environment. And I think the environmental issues that they put out there, and the doom and gloom that they present, are sometimes a bit of a smokescreen for other things that are going down.
And yet, previous civilizations have become extinct, we've basically gone down.
Well, I think a lot of that is human dynamics. Those extinctions would probably be effect of maybe a localized environmental factor, an extended drought, or a local flood, and I mean, those situations have existed in the past. It's not that the world hasn't had catastrophic environmental conditions. I mean, they have happened. We do have volcanoes erupting, having a huge effect on a much greater area than just the local one. I think it's more how man influences his local environment, and how they can try and keep a status quo of balancing nature and balancing human needs.
project would work, where they would come and negotiate because they'd have an agenda. They want to come in here and they want to start a AIDS orphanage or something like that. They would go to the chief and they'd say to the chief, we want to start up an AIDS orphanage and we want to try and employ some people and educate some people and we want to take care of all your AIDS orphans and for that we want some land. And the chief would think about it seriously and he would feel important and say, yes, it's a good idea, we need these things. And there would be this trade-off. But in a way, the project would then be beheld to the chief. Whereas we kind of came through the back door here. Firstly, because I came in here with a preconceived idea that this whole tribal system or traditional system was flawed anyway, and it failed. So I came in here with kind of really a judgment against this whole traditional system and things like that, from what I'd heard, which is really unfair, but that's how I came in here. I sort of touched a little bit on what Contra Lesser, which is the concrete traditional leaders, was all about, and it looked dodgy. In a sense, it was quite rude. I should have gone to the great place of this specific council and said, I'm here to do this. The other thing was, having worked in the Transkei before, worked in many other countries in Africa as well, is that you sort of also believe in the bush telegraph. And I sort of thought, well, what I'm doing, if it's important enough, then somebody will hear about it and they'll come and find me and say, let's meet, sort of thing, which didn't happen. So either the bush telephone didn't get there, or I just haven't been doing enough important stuff really at that level. So what that did for the project anyway was, I think, was quite beneficial in that journey of understanding what these problems are all about, because we didn't have to work to anybody's agenda or had to deliver anything to anybody. While I was busy, not sure what I was really doing, just building this island in the middle of this place that I wasn't familiar with, having never been as close to the coast. I'd worked up in Ngcobo and places like that several years before. To put in a relatively self-sustainable place and hoping that people would just be flocked and would just feel there's some kind of magnetic pull to this place and we could teach people how to eat and to respect water and soil and building and things like that and get their houses stronger, which was really naive of me, I think, in hindsight. I think people are used to being herded in a way, and they just didn't. So they thought in order to engage with me, they'd have to pay me. In other words, if they want to come and make bricks, they'd have to pay me to do that, which was never in my mind, but I didn't articulate that very well, I think. So all this time I'm busy developing these gardens, I'm busy building these buildings, and sorting out these water issues and things like that. And at the same time, I'm watching it collapse around me on the greater scale, the municipality falling to pieces, the water systems falling to pieces, understanding how that's affected the whole dynamics of the community. Because I'm living inside this place and I'm seeing, and I've done this before in other places in other parts of Africa, but never with such a social dysfunctionality, which is what we've got here. So watching people's buildings fall down, and not jumping in these things and trying to save everybody, but just saying, well, tough. You don't, until you decide to integrate, it's what's going to happen. Of course, because what then, whether it was a good thing or a bad thing, but this main chief who was head of Contra Lesser, who I was working with, died and left this huge void suddenly that we had started, which was about leadership. And he completely saw things the way that I saw things, of understanding that present leadership was flawed and had to be nurtured, and then to start focusing on the next leadership, the children, and to create leadership schools for these guys to come through so we can start to shift the whole thing around. Everything is based on oil.
Yeah.
Our monetary system, our judicial system, our education systems, everything on this table. Well, this is now second generation, so that's now no longer oil required. But that's our existence. Oil comes crash. I mean, we see it. I mean, yesterday, the Dow Jones fell another 3.5% yesterday. You look across the board, in the American markets, it's just red. They just crashed. Oil organizations went down 4 to 5%. They're just coming crashing down, and it's happening every day. They're totally overinflated because they're based on where they think the oil reserves are, not where the royal, because everybody's overselling their oil. They're saying, oh no, we've got loads of it still, because they don't want to create panic. We're into these long wars now. I mean, when you've got a country like America that's a net importer of oil, when they produce, I think about 2 to 3, not even 2% probably anymore, of the world's oil. But they use 25% of the world's oil. I mean, they have to control the world. The economy is based on it. They have to control the world's oil, which means they have to be in war. So that's what's going to go on. I mean, it's not going to stop. The only thing that's going to stop it, when there's no more oil to put in the ship, the HSS Indomitable or whatever it's called, to get it across the ocean anymore, that's when it's all going to come grinding to a halt. So we go back to this governance you're talking about. It's all based on central control. But what happens when that central control is broken? The most recent example of that happening was when Katrina went into New Orleans. And it cut off, in a first world country, okay, it cut off Washington, D.C. And within hours, people turned on people. Shops were pillaged. Next thing, people just turned on people. Okay, and that's what happens when there's chaos, when there's no more control, there's no one. So now, in a third world or developing country, when suddenly that power line is cut, it's going to be mayhem. Unless we can shift it, and we can get people and communities, let's call them transition, whatever we want to call them, there's all these words have been banning around, where they are taking care of themselves. Where they're not reliant upon the central system of control, which is money. And so there's something that's gone. You see, in our conditioning, and we are so conditioned, we have become codependent, where we depend upon each other. And this is really it's a disease. If we use which I do often, I use an analogy of a forest. And we see these forests where they're codependent, where the trees cross over each other and they stop the flow of air through each other, and they stop the growth. And we've seen it here. There's so much evasive stuff comes in. But if you look at a forest that each tree stands strong on its own, and then as a collective, it's incredibly strong. It's a strong, healthy environment. And it's a three-dimensional living thing then. And if we can create that where people can stand strong on their own as individuals, and then as a community, they're really, really strong. And they do things out of free will. Then we can shift the consciousness. But that goes against the religious beliefs, because that's all about codependency. I mean, goodness, it's so disempowering. It's very, there's this fellow who died for my sins. For goodness sakes, I'll die for my own sins. It's very disempowering, and that's where it starts. And it's been so successful. It's indoctrinated in this. In these areas that I am in. This religion that's used here now, several versions of Christianity that are all over these areas that I'm in here. Unbelievable, the fear and the obsession with death. And the amount of resources that get put into death. And this dignity in death, but where's the dignity in life? And that's what we need to be focusing on. Is that every moment that we have this gift of living, and let's make it count. Let's be authentic. But we're all put our belief in old mutual and funeral schemes for our death, so we can be remembered. But these guys who have they throw these huge parties. They spent their life beating their wives, abusing their children. But they had this incredible funeral, man. It was huge. You should have seen it. Strong Muti there. No. It's disgraceful. Let's put that dignity into life now. And I really do believe that in this religion that existed before we came along with this whole sort of Christianity trip and things like that, was this incredible dynamic relationship between the earth and the people in Africa. They call it Kwamata or something like that, and it's brilliant. It's so naive. It's brilliant. It's got counterbalance. It's just based in love and respect. And if you respect the sun for rising, for setting, you respect the seasons. You show respect to the animal you kill to nurture yourself. you respect your spouse or your kids, or, you know, suddenly here come these guys and saying, oh, hold on, you know, you guys are savages unless you, bow down to this figure here. That's it. You're going to go and die a miserable death in hell and things like it. And how could people come here with anything but love anyway? Because it's all we believe in is love. Okay, so this is how people are building here. People without much means, which is called a wattle and daub. So here you've got your wattle, which is your wooden framework, and then they're packing in the daub, which is the clay, in here. Now, historically, this is a brilliant way to build. I mean, a lot of your Tudor houses in the United Kingdom, which have quite adverse weather, use this system. Okay, and they've lasted for hundreds and hundreds of years. This house won't last a year. Okay, and I have to redo it. What I'd like to propose that the way that this has been mixed, the way it's been mixed in, there's not much intention going into this. It shows a victim mentality within the people, because if this clay was worked through properly, in other words, it was kneaded like you knead bread, they put a bit of some dry grass in it, or some millie husks and things like that into it, it would create a stronger integrity in the bond, and it would last for years and years and years. But this has really just been put together very loosely, and there's not much love goes into this wall, and that's why we're using cements and things like that, because it's practical and it gives it longevity. Now, if you go into some of your sort of Central American, Santa Fe, those sort of areas, for them, which they use the adobe blocks, which is also just sort of sun-dried bricks, clay bricks. For them to come once a year, and the woman would you'll push it down, which is your primary compaction. All right. Then take that over, and then this is where you'll notice the bottom is coming up.
Yes.
So it's compacting from the bottom. So there's your compaction. All right. So it's compacting up. Up it goes, and it pops the brick out, which would be up there now. 2 people could make a brick every 17 seconds.
Yeah.
But you get machines now that can do 12 bricks at once, doing the same. But the nice thing about it is that, as opposed to the machines that can make 1,500 bricks a day, there's a huge effect on the environment, where you're actually getting, I mean, that's a hungry machine, and where you're getting that material from. Whereas this here, it's more hand. You can use the foundations of your building to build the walls up. It doesn't have to have such a negative effect on the environment. They're not fully set yet, so I don't want to mess with them too much. So it's 240 mils long, and it's 100 high, and it's 140 wide, which from an engineering perspective is perfect for a wall. You can support a roof with this lightweight roof, and it'll be fine. This has got to set for about 3 weeks. This digester, which I designed, it's a closed bag. Well, it's got an inlet and an outlet and a gas outlet. So it's made from reinforced PVC, which is the same material as you'll make a jumping castle from. And it's shaped. The shape of it is like a loaf of bread. It's risen. So it has the convex top on it, and everything else is squared. It fits into this frame here that I just built with brick. And how it works is that it comes from the toilets, the waste comes into the I can also feed it with green material, which produces most of, if I really want to get a lot of, push my my methane levels up, I'll feed it with some bananas or stuff like that, which boosts it. It comes in here, and inside here I have a live culture, which is anaerobic, which means that it exists without oxygen. Okay, so it's the digestion process is anaerobic as opposed to aerobic, which is like your composting loos and things like this. So the microbes that exist inside here break down the waste very, very efficiently, and the energy that comes out of that is the methane gas. Now, if you can smell, Judy, which it's almost a composty smell. There's not necessarily a sewage smell, but there's a slight composty smell. if you come close down here, you could almost smell, you could smell the gas as well, which is when you burn it, there's no smell whatsoever. Again, it's a composty one. It's not necessarily unpleasant. We'll fill this with green material, with anything, and we'll just get some water and shove it down. It's a big stomach. That's how it really works. There's enzymes that are breaking down the material inside there. And from that they create methane gas. And they create high nutrient water. Now there have been sort of many household biodigestion systems that are coming out. There are about 6 cubic meters prefabricated systems that cost probably about 40,000 rands. And they're not high gas yielding, but what they are doing is they're breaking down the water, the black water, the effluent water, which is really critical. And so therefore the principles are very much along these lines. This is just a bit more rudimentary. And so from here the water will go through a sand filter, which is what this is, which we've got. Obviously there's high nutrients in here. We've still got about 5 to 7% pathogens, which is your E. coli, etc., coming into here, which then these plant life will take it out. So it'll come into here, it will filtrate down through a slow sand filter. Underneath here, about a meter down, there's a hole, and it'll come up here, which this is full of shells like this, and charcoal, which then absorb the last remnants of pathogens. Okay, that's what this one, and the reeds, of course, as well, take out anything. So it's we really have removed as much. I mean, if there's anything left, it's absolute trace elements. The water will gather in here and settle, and then will slowly gravitate down through our trees and our orchards, which are down that side, which is high nutrient water, which you can drink. It'll give you a bit of a stomach ache because it's high in nutrients, but certainly nothing poisonous. And but it's very good for growth of the trees and plants. We've got coffee trees down there and a loquat tree, and we're definitely seeing pronounced growth as to the other trees that we have around here that are not enjoying these high nutrients that we're getting out of here. So ultimately what you'd like to have is say 3 or 4 houses together, all the waste leading into a digester, which then would lead into an orchard, oranges or whatever, which would then go to provide food for that house, provide the energy for the gas, as well as, most importantly in my mind, is processing the black water and not getting it into the waterways, which is critical. So we've got our dam over there where the water collects. Alright, it's about 120,000 litres of water. We've got our fish inside there as well, which is a source of protein. And we feed the garden with that water as well, which then all slopes back into the dam slowly. From there the water is pumped up through to the storage tank, but it goes through a filtration process first, and then we can put in a solar pump to pump it up to our it's a 5,000 litre storage tank. The water is then, there's pipes going around down into the kitchen. From the kitchen it's processed where we've got our trees going. We've got bananas trees there, citrus trees going. We've got nut trees, avocado trees, pawpaws, as well as guava and coffee. We've got about 350 coffee trees in this space as well, which is about another 3 years to go before they start producing. And then we've got climbing beans all over the place, which we're getting a huge amount of food from, plus our loofahs, which we eat when they're still young, and then we've got our pigeon peas as well, plus all our herbs and that. And then we go all the way down where we've got our ground covers. This is what we can call an aerated bed. It's off the ground. We've got green material at the very bottom, which is composting, and then we've got which is a long nutrient release bed, which is like a double dug bed, and then above it we've got layers where we've got decomposing materials at various stages, plus cow manure. That's very rich if you look at that. If we look around here, of course, sod's law, we won't find any, but there's worms everywhere as well that are working away. Perhaps if we look in one of the other ones, and then we cover that all up. Right now, because it's winter, we have quite a bit of dew, and this mulch here is holding that water, because we're in drought now, is holding that water on the ground. Plus the kind of growth here, we've got corianders and cresses which are low onto the ground, and not using up too much of the precious nutrients. But this is where we have problems, where we have invasive plants like this guavadilla, which just comes on and takes over.
But it does produce fruit that you eat.
It produces fruit, but it stops the oxygen from getting to these plants. So this needs to be managed a bit. In this garden here, we've got not just fruit that's for eating, but it's to attract other insects that eat aphids and things like that, like the marigold, which the scent. Some of these invasive pests don't like the smell of, and it attracts other ones which then also eat other pests. So it's a very strong deterrent. This is our dam, which already now we're a month and a half into the dry season, and we're seeing quite a bit of depletion of the water already. But last year we just managed to survive with it, but this year we've got more fish in it, so it's going to be interesting to see. Some of the fish are already at edible size. Just haven't worked out to catch the buggers yet. There's some turtles in here as well, which frogs. So it's quite diverse. Turtles take out the small fish to try and keep the population down a bit. You can see that each rice has its own little, each grain of rice has a little sheath that exists in. Here's your grain of rice. Our food production has been up about 20 to 30% since we've had the bees here. We were getting some bees still before we put the hive here from the forest, but this hive is about 6-7 months old now and is very, very active. We've already put the second super on the top. So the super is where our honey lives. So the big box at the bottom is the bees' honey, where the queen lives, and then above there is where when that's full, they move up, and that's when we harvest our honey. So the middle one is now full, and the top one is half full now. And what we'll do is, as we go into winter now, the activity will be less and less, and we'll put on one more super, I think, and then we'll harvest the honey probably in the springtime. So now we're not just looking at some kind of one-dimensional garden. We're taking it to all different, and we're utilizing all of it, and we're rotating them all the time, and then also protecting them through the winter months. So it's just being conscious, but certainly there's a lot less energy is put into this garden as it develops more and more and more, and nature is allowed to do her thing, which is what's really exciting about it. And it truly, I do believe in about 2 years' time, it will be a food forest. And if we can get more and more of these into these communities, and people can understand them and nurture them, and yes, take, but then also put back and feed, then we can start to create community around these sources of food.
Copenhagen is using the bike every day. What you can't see is that we have district heating. Almost 100% of all buildings in Copenhagen is heated by district heating, and 63% is renewable now. So we are also on the way to make that change to 2025, where we have to be 100% renewable. We have also taken the decision, or the city council has taken the decision, to build 100 turbines in Denmark, and we are in the tender process, on the national tender process for the time being in doing that. So that is an important part of the transformation. Electric vehicles, it's difficult to have the same numbers as in Norway, that's for sure, but we're doing it ourselves in our own fleet, also with a more efficient fleet, and have now more than 200 electric vehicles in the fleet, and working to the number of 100%. Climate adaptation, also have to remember that, because that is important for a lot of cities, also our cities. We have had a lot of severe cloudburst in Copenhagen over the last 4 years with really high damage, and so that is also, we have just approved, or the City Council have just approved 300 projects to implement over the coming years. So a simple plan. What I want to say is that technology is maybe not the difficult part here. We have the technologies more or less. Of course, we have to improve and innovate on that. But what is really difficult is the involvement of stakeholders. We need to work in new ways with the stakeholders, with industry and universities. Otherwise, it will be impossible to solve the climate problem. Just a few figures on development. As I said, 2.8 ton per capita, and a 31% reduction in total in the last 9 years. And we see also a reduction in transport, but a slight increase last year, so we have to follow that the coming years, because that is really one of the challenges in cities. Yeah, so to conclude, I think what we can show in the Nordic cities is that we can have a strong political commitment for this transformation, and that is also a really important message to other cities around in the world. Also that we have good financial basic, and that is one of the issues also here in Paris. We need a financial solutions for cities. Otherwise, the infrastructure will not be the right one for the next 10 years, where a lot of cities will increase rapidly. Broad stakeholder involvement is key, and we have to work with new partnership models, public-private innovation, for example, but also having some common business plans together with, develop that together with business and universities. And finally, and not least, a lot of communication about what we're doing, sharing our knowledge with cities and citizens in for the implementation of that is really key. Thank you.
Copenhagen and Stockholm are one of the first 10 cities full members of the Compact of Mayors, which of course we are very proud of, but it's also an example of what we are doing. Stockholm are one of Europe's fastest growing cities right now. We are growing by about between 15 and 20,000. Half are coming from the hospital, it's newborn babies, and the other half is coming from is immigration. And right now, as you perhaps know, Sweden and Stockholm as well are facing a very serious situation when it comes to immigrants. We have never seen anything like it, and the capacity to take care of everybody who wants to come to Sweden is over the edge and over the capacity. But we think the master plan is to create a dense city, and we think that it's also a sustainable city. So we want to use the facilities for public transit and biking. It's a shift in transport mode in Stockholm. And so also a different attitude among the public. When I started to work in the city hall 25 years ago, most people thought that Stockholm shouldn't grow. Today we want to grow, and it's a political consensus both that we want to grow, but also about the environment and sustainability. My mayor from the Green Party is not here, but there is nowadays very little difference between the conservative side and the left-wing side. We have a left-wing majority in the city hall, but we right now, since a year back, that we have had 8 years of a conservative coalition, and basically it's a total different compared to the situation 10 years ago. What we are measuring here is heating, electricity and transport. Of course we are aware about the consumption and the goods, but we have the same conclusion as you. It's almost impossible to measure it. and we don't want to ruin our statistics. We still want to do what we can do in the city, and no matter what will happen in this conference, what happened in Copenhagen 5 years ago, and we still want to do what we can to minimize our carbon dioxide emissions. So we have gone from 5.3 tons in 1990. We are right now down at somewhere 2.8, perhaps 2.6, 2.7, because we have rather warm winters. And the next goal is to be down to 2.3 tons in 2020 and to be a totally fossil fuel-free city. This is more complicated. I know that you want to be a climate neutral city and the first capital being climate neutral in 2025, but to be a fossil fuel free city is to have no fossil or carbon dioxide emissions at all. So what we are now planning for, how to get rid of the plastic in the incineration plants, for example, how do we control the car traffic? That is the biggest challenge that we have in Stockholm. And as you can see, we're down at about 2.5 million tons CO2 emissions. We have lowering it in the emissions in the city by a million million tons CO2 emissions since the last 15 years. And the blue line here is heating, and this is electricity, and that is car traffic and transport. And we think that we will be totally fossil-free heating in 2030, somewhere between 2025 and 2030. It's a discussion to perhaps be it already in 2020, but that would be extremely expensive, and we don't control our energy company. For the heating company, it's where half is owned by the Finnish company Fortum, which is owned by the Finnish state, basically. And electricity, we are calculating the Nordic mix here. If you're then Swedish electricity, almost fossil-free. It's half is hydropower, then 40% is nuclear power, and the rest is wind, some solar, and some combination of the in the district heating systems. The big challenge is the traffic. How can we ensure that the car driving in Stockholm, and half of all car driving in Stockholm is not Stockholmers, they're coming outside from the neighbor municipalities in the region of Stockholm, but how can we control them so they don't use fossil fuels? And that is a challenge. We don't have the legal access to every measurements that we need in action, but that is what we want to do. I use this is the old king, our present king, which is Gustav II Adolf, is the present king's grandpa, and the king will be here tomorrow, I think. But here is inaugurating the combination when we combine the southern metro line with the western metro line. And the interesting thing, we are lucky in Stockholm to have very foreseen politicians. They planned metro stations to places where no one lived because they had the inner vision of the growing city. And the environmental work and the climate work have brought back the long-term perspective. What we are facing in Stockholm as one of the biggest challenge is the sea level rise of the Baltic Sea, because if the Baltic Sea flood into the big lake Mälaren, we have no fresh water. This is Hammarby waterfront. It's one of the first and most well-known eco-districts in the world. But here was the aim to reduce the environmental impact by 50%. Almost succeeded, but the experiences from here, we took it to the next district that we will reduce the environmental impact by another 50%. Here we have very tough energy performance request. We own the land, the City of Stockholm own the land, and there is a number of private developers, about 25 to 30 developers, who are building up 10,000 new apartments in a new green residential district in the north inner city of Stockholm. In Stockholm, and I think as in Copenhagen and Oslo, we have a green market-driven situation. This is an example where it's not so much of new technology, but it's a new thinking. This building is the head office for two big newspapers in Stockholm, the Svenska Dagbladet and Aftonbladet, and they are it's heated by the heat surplus from the central station that used to be ventilated out. Now it's in use. It's cold from the water outside, and it's an example of that private developers and private construction companies are competing to be the greenest in Stockholm. We also have the district heating. We have the market share is a little bit more than 80%, but this is also the third party interest that innovate, that we are now analyzing what sources are there from computer centers that could be used to feed the district heating system, and the district heating system will be almost fossil-free. It will be fossil-free in 2030 at latest, I would say. But we're using new sources and trying to develop energy that it's already made, and instead of ventilate out the heat surplus from different offices or computer centers, etc., we try to use it. The same thing with the district cooling. Instead of using electricity, we use the water to cool our buildings. And this is also the contributor to the better air quality. Stockholm has 100 times better air quality today than we had 50 years ago when I was a kid in the city of Stockholm. Congestion charges is one of the most well-known infrastructure project in Stockholm. It was introduced in 2006 after huge opposition from the Stockholmers. Now everyone is, it's a consensus. We will increase the price by 75% from the 1st of January 2016, and there is no opposition. Everyone knows it, but it's fully accepted as a tool. And the traffic level it has been remained reduction compared to 2005, but reasonably 25%. And despite the fact that we now are 100,000 more people in the region and 200,000 more people in the region and 100,000 in the city, and no increase of car traffic. It's a traffic not simply because we don't have the road space anymore, and we are reserving the big roads for public transit and bikers. And we are now having heavily investment program in new metro lines, one up in the north, one to the east, one small extension in the northwest, and a new southern metro line, just to make people to manage the transport. We also try to increase the infrastructure for electrical cars. We think it will explode on the market in the 5 years, but we don't control it by ourselves, but we need to get the price down, and we don't have the same situation as you have in Norway, where an electrical car is about the same price as a normal car. But we have, for 20 years, we have been run a clean car project in Stockholm, and Stockholmers want to buy clean cars. So more than 20%, almost 25% is cars that emitted less than 95 gram. But 2040 it will be 0 gram CO2 emission. And so what we are working with is the heavy traffic, and we have been running different EDU projects to promote clean truck in Stockholm and in Europe as well. And we work together with the business community with the climate agreement. It started 2007 with 5 companies, and now it's 170 different companies want to take part in a greener and Stockholm, and to reduce and help the city to achieve our climate goals. And this is the broadband net of Stockholm, the city-owned company called Stokab. That's Europe's biggest fiber net, and that will help us to reduce it. We are now using the technology and ICT development as a tool in the climate combat. And the Stockholmers are behind us. 90% of the Stockholmers think it's very good that we have high ambitions. And people also accept that we put a demand on the household to reduce their CO2 emissions and to adopt a more sustainable lifestyle. And we have tremendous success when we have a cookbook of sustainability, climate cookbook, which have been a success in Stockholm. So we have already decided to be fossil fuel free 2050. Now it's already in 2040. It will be it's almost finished in the proposal for the city council, but it will be a consultation on that. So somewhere in May, June, we will see the city council decide on the roadmap for 2040. Thank you very much.
It's my pleasure to be here in Paris today, and I'm very glad that I have the opportunity to briefly explain you Helsinki Climate Roadmap that we recently finalized in Helsinki. In Helsinki we have a target of being carbon neutral and climate resilient by 2050, so a little bit more slowly than Copenhagen and Stockholm. Waste has an almost minimal impact in this respect. Households are the main source of greenhouse emissions. Over 50%. Traffic is number, or services and workplaces is number 2 in this, and we have relatively little industry in Helsinki. Only 10% of the emissions are produced by industry. The city's own services and buildings and public transport is causing only 8% of emissions, which is a relatively small amount. So we have to have an effective impact on the other private citizens, for example. They have to come into this work in order that Helsinki can reduce emissions. The red line is emissions in tons per capita, and blue line is the emissions, the total emissions. The difference is due to the relatively rapid increase in inhabitants in Helsinki. We are also growing, as we heard, is the case in Copenhagen and Stockholm. We have got about 100 inhabitants more compared to year 1990. Now we are about 600,000. And if you think about year 2050, we are expecting to have 260,000 inhabitants more in Helsinki, which is about 40% increase in the present figures. We have had about 23% decrease in total emissions compared to year 1990, and almost 40% if you calculate that per capita. So the direction is good, but there is still a lot of work to be done, of course. Last spring we published Helsinki Climate Roadmap. I took a couple of them with me. I don't know where they disappeared, but there was about 50 examples of this there we try to explain to politicians and also to general public what could each individual do in order to minimize our climate footprint. There are many practical advice, and also we have collected all the things that Helsinki City has been doing during the past years. We found some 800 different projects and different decisions that had an impact on climate change, and we kind of put them together to this climate roadmap. As I mentioned, we want to be carbon neutral by 2050, and emissions from the city area should be diminished by 30% by year 2020, and we have almost reached that target. Also emissions from energy production reduction with 20%, that has already almost been reached. Okay, our vision for 2050 is that we want to have a new climate-friendly modes of business, and we want to have also a green environment that promotes the health and well-being of residents. That's not a very easy task as the city is growing so fast, but I think that our city planning is doing a very good work in this respect. And we want that energy would be produced in a carbon neutral way, and that we would have the world's best energy efficiency. We are also doing quite many projects with rain and meltwater, how to treat them, how they could be used in parks and gardens, and so that they wouldn't go to the wastewater treatment plants. And we are aiming at a dense urban structure, and that of course helps us in generating low transportation emissions in Helsinki. Some ongoing energy saving projects. We have a so-called energy renaissance in suburbs. We have a lot of buildings that have been built in 50s and 60s, and now they are about to need some renovation. And we want to increase the energy efficiency of this building in a significant way. We have also published some let's say, practical guidance how to do it, and also some possibilities how to get finance for this work. Yes, of course we have several advisory services and campaigns in this respect. And what comes to our own buildings, city buildings, we aim at nearly zero energy guidelines. For example, the building of Helsinki Environment Center, in which I work, is now carbon free this year, and it's the most energy efficient building of Finland actually, even it's already 4 years old, and I think that's a pity. I would like that someone would be better, but no one has done that so far. Yes, Helsinki is producing now heat and power in a very efficient way, as it combines the production of electricity, production of heat, and also cooling. And this system saves about 40% of fuels compared to normal system. We are increasing slowly the use of renewable energy sources. It's now only 7%, but it's going to be 20 by 2020. Actually, probably tomorrow a very important decision will be made in this respect. The city council will probably decide to close our biggest energy plant, Hanasaari, and that means that use of coal in Helsinki will decrease by 2/3. So a big difference, but decision will be made tomorrow, so I can't be 100% sure if this is the case, but I'm almost 100% sure that this will be the decision. Yeah. One simple example is Katrivala heating and cooling plant, which is the biggest plant in world of this kind. It uses the waste energy from the wastewater of Helsinki. It takes the heat out from it, and sometimes during summer, if it's very hot in Helsinki, that can also sometimes happen. That then this can be used vice versa, so that it gives cooling energy to the city. It's about 80% more energy efficient than let's say normal plant would be. We are going to have guidelines for locating wind power in the city area. We had a study that showed that most people want to have more wind power in the city, and that's what is going to happen in Helsinki as well. We try to adapt to increasing rainfall and flooding, and of course the methodologies, requirements and guidance for more energy efficient buildings are being created. We'll try to create a global reference area for smart and clean solutions, and there we have quite a good collaboration between cities, businesses and government. This project was launched in March this year, and now we have already some 80 companies, big companies or universities, research institutes there, and they have done some 150, let's say, agreement on what they are going to do in this respect. And of course, mobility issues, building and water supply, energy efficiency, consumer and clean tech are subject of this kind of picture of every single house of Helsinki, and you can see whether your house is losing energy from rooftop and compare it to your neighbor if you want to. And also the similar exercise was made of the solar potential of the rooftops.
Control regime, which I use very often whenever confronted with any kind of suspicion of any kind of illegal activities of a reefer vessel, is that the information about these vessels that have been detained is very easily available on the internet. Each MOU provide you with a list, and so whenever I have some concern about the vessel, I'm thinking, okay, let's check this out. What is the profile of this vessel? And sure enough, there I can find every single port that this vessel has been inspected in, whether there has been any deficiencies reported, within what amount of time has been fixed and so forth. And when you see some of these reefers and they have 13 defects, etc., well, then that tells you something about what kind of company is behind this, what kind of vessel it is. And if we could have that for fishing vessels as well, it would give us really a wealth of information to profile the operators that we are dealing with.
And indeed, it's something that South Africa is actually looking very seriously into. We have even had the Torremolinos Convention, which is actually making sure that the vessels need to have the AIS to ensure that we are able to track these fishing vessels in our coastline. We have a monitoring room that's operating 24 hours at SAMSA, and I think starting from that we can even collaborate with DAF, with their control room, and try to implement it and have those stringent measures in place. And I think once we ratify that convention, we will be even in a better position to regulate those fishing vessels, even those that comes into South Africa.
I firmly believe that if you do have a suspected IUU vessel, you should actually allow it into your port, and then you can apply the full range of your domestic law to that vessel and thorough investigation and inspection of that vessel. If it's got fish on board, you don't necessarily need to allow them to unload the fish, and you can conduct that investigation, and then you come up with a lot of evidence, a lot of information about who beneficial owners are, where the product might be going, associated persons. Then if you're unhappy with it, leave port. So for those that are looking at port state measures, I'd encourage you to allow them into your ports so that you can then apply the full suite of domestic law once they're outside of port, once they're on the high seas, we're limited. Once you've got them in your domestic jurisdiction, you've got far more power.
Another very, very useful thing with the post-state control regime, which I use very often whenever confronted with any kind of suspicion of any kind of illegal activities on behalf of a reefer vessel, is that the information about these vessels that have been detained is very easily available on the internet. Each MOU provide you with a list, and so whenever I have some concern about the vessel, I'm thinking, okay, let's check this out. What is the profile of this vessel? And sure enough, there I can find every single port that this vessel has been inspected in, whether there has been any deficiencies reported, within what amount of time has been fixed and so forth. And when you see some of these reefers and they have 13 defects, etc., well, then that tells you something about what kind of company is behind this, what kind of vessel it is. Now, if we could have that for fishing vessels as well, it would give us really a wealth of information to profile the operators that we are dealing with.
What would you think of introducing notion of strict liability for certain fisheries crime? We had that in our fisheries law prior to our constitution, and some of that in South Africa at least is possibly unconstitutional, but it could be taken up at international domestic level to work towards strict liability. If you are found at the moment with, say, 5 rock lobster in your possession, it's up to you to prove that they weren't taken illegally.
Where you could take away somebody's boat, you could forfeit their fish, you could ban them from the industry. Because what you're doing is you're putting the onus on them to comply. And so maybe the simplest example of that is a speeding ticket. Nobody really cares whether you knew you were traveling over the speed limit. The rule is you travel over the speed limit, you have to pay the ticket. And the idea is that it puts the onus on you to stay below the speed limit or around there. Criminal law at its very fundamental level deals with blame. It's society blaming an individual for being bad, doing something that was bad. And so at a very, very fundamental level, I think every legal system that's civilized that I'm aware of, you have 2 components, actus reus and mens rea. And the idea is look, if I pull out a gun and I shoot somebody, am I guilty of murder? And the answer is, well, it depends. If I thought I was shooting at a target and somebody happened to be standing behind the target, do we regret that? We absolutely regret that. Am I guilty of intentionally murdering somebody? I'm not. And that's a very important moral principle that I think we have to embrace. And certainly it would be unconstitutional to have strict liability, I think, in the United States. It's probably not a satisfying answer, but it's fundamental to criminal law. You can regulate society in other ways, but if you're going to use criminal law, strict liability is almost never a possibility. It does happen in the United States in very, very rare circumstances, but it would almost certainly be unconstitutional in a situation like Galicia.
Well, I think you've got a good point, because there is a balance between risk and the consequences. Everyone does risk analysis, so do they. But the risks and the costs may be quite low, because the criminalisation of fisheries crime is not equivalent to the level of criminalisation of the risks for say, droughts. And it may be well the case that the value of the vessels is not terribly high, and they may be prepared to write those off as they can buy some other ones quite easily. But it would also may reach a situation where the vessels are forfeit and they're auctioned, and maybe they can buy them back at a cheaper rate and have a vessel which is free of any issues because it's seen as changed owner, but it may be the same entity but with a different corporate role. I mean, that happens in the maritime industry, where we've seen vessels being abandoned with a cruise and the same people have bought them back at auction which means there's no liens against them. They can carry on and do it again repeatedly. So there is a risk there as well.
I did a bit of research on the Lacey Act, and I wrote, after the Bengas saga, I wrote a long article in the Cape Times suggesting exactly that, because we have wildlife crime generally, as we all know, rhino horn, elephant poaching, and I was hoping it would be taken up, particularly in Vietnam and other Asian countries where our rhino horn, etc. goes. But I got no feedback from a very prominent article in the local media. So I'd like to ask, not on the panel, but I know there's a delegate from at least Indonesia or other Asian delegates, what they see the political hurdles might be to have a Lacey type act in their jurisdictions.
Port state control is really not something that we have been discussing a lot in the fisheries crime context yet. Still, it is such an untapped resource for our ability to conduct routine control and investigations of vessels, or around inspections of vessels. And for those of you that perhaps isn't familiar with port state control, because it doesn't really exist in the fisheries context, it might be worthwhile to give 2 words of background to how the system works. So you've got a number of conventions that do not apply. On board these vessels, the working and living conditions were horrendous. These vessels were clearly unsafe and unseaworthy. Now, you can spend a lot of time prosecuting the crimes, but you can bring that vessel out of circulation very easily if it's not maintained to certain standards.
The biggest problem that I see is one that we've talked about on numerous panels, and that's corruption. And it's not just corruption with respect to the bribing the environmental police and et cetera to look the other way. It's also corruption in the judiciary and in the prosecution offices. I'll give you an example. I was able to really build a case against Arnold Benjes in the United States based on mens rea and other things is because I was able to split cooperators. And there's no way of sugarcoating that. What that means is that I arrested people. I said, you are going to face a long prison sentence. Here's roughly what that prison sentence will be. That's par for the course, and you're welcome to go ahead and either go to trial or plead guilty and go to jail. Or you can work with the United States, cooperate, provide truthful testimony in the prosecution or investigation of another person, and you can get a lower sentence. And we were allowed to do that because we have a judicial system that is transparent and that the rule of law matters. Let me flip to something else that happened to me recently. I was in Masai Mara in Kenya, and I was asking one of the wildlife officials there, how many poachers have you arrested in the last year? And he gave me an astonishing answer. He said 40. And I was stunned because if I were prosecuting there, I would have taken each one of those 40 and I would have flipped them, and that would have turned into 2 more arrests and then 4 more arrests, and we would have had easily 200 people arrested and worked our way up the chain. That's how you do a prosecution here. That's how you do it in the United States. I said, what happened to those 40? And the guy said, I have no idea. All right. And you need to fix the corruption in all of the countries in the world, and that's what will ultimately strengthen us.
G'day, we're here at Monkey Valley Resort at Crown Eagle, overlooking Long Beach. We're going to cook some beef fillet today. It's free range fillet, it's organic. It's not fed the normal stuff that you get from these battery sort of animals, that is fed grain that is made from that has been affected, and it leaves a sort of footprint on the planet, and it's not really good for you. It's also known that in future we're going to start running out of proteins and natural food, so we must start looking at ways for our own well-being and for other generations to come to utilize food that is natural and less protein. This meat that we're going to cook today, we're only going to use like 8% protein of the whole meal, and the rest is all going to be carbohydrates or vegetables in this case. So we're going to start by roasting off some pepper, red pepper, lots of color. It's known to lower your blood sugar or your cholesterol. Very good for you. It's got a lot of color. It's tasty. They say that if you eat red pepper in the morning with your egg whites, it's good for keeping the hunger at bay. So I'm going to start off by roasting this in the pan slowly. Just going to add a little bit of butter, pure butter. Also very good for you in small amounts. And then I got the beef fillet here. I'm just going to cut a small section of it. That's all we're going to need for this dish. And then we got some aubergine here, also known as brinjal or eggplant. That's going to go into the pan with the red pepper there. And then I got some baby marrow here, also known as courgettes or zucchini in America. Nice green color, which has got a lot of fiber, which is good for you. Helps with the digestion. So we're all just going to put it all in the pan and just let it cook slowly on a low heat there till it's ready, while we prep the rest of the ingredients. So I got a little bit of broccoli here. So once again, nice green color, lots of fiber. And I'm not adding any water or anything here. I'm just relying purely on the low heat and the natural water that's in the vegetables to slowly sort of cook it down. I'm going to take another pan. You can put a lid on this, but I'm going to take another pan and just let it cook in there slowly. So you're creating like a little, almost like a little pot, steam pot, closed pot there. That's going to cook itself. Because it's closed, the steam will drop back into the pan, so it will ensure that the vegetables doesn't burn. So by the time your vegetables is cooked, it will have a nice color. Then I'm going to take a little bit of cherry tomatoes. So this is almost like a Mediterranean dish. Olives. Just going to take the pip out of olives. Then I'm going to take a little bit of red wine here. This is going to be the main part of our sauce for the beef. So I'm just going to pour a little bit of red wine over there just to let it start marinating slowly before we cook it, while we wait for the vegetables to cook. This is going to take like another 5 minutes or so. We're just going to wait for that. After this finishes, then we're going to start cooking our meat to the temperature that's the desired temperature, and we're going to add the vegetables to that. Right, so the vegetables is carried on for another 5 minutes now. It's almost ready, so it's now time to heat our pan for our beef fillet. Just getting a bit of temperature there. Once that reaches temperature, you take a little bit of butter. Season the meat. Right, I'm going to turn this to this side because it's colder there. I need to heat here. In the meantime, while we wait, we can have a sip of red wine. Which is good for the cholesterol. Okay, our butter is starting to melt slowly. It's going to be sufficient and it's going to be a nice flavor to the meat. The red pepper complements the meat, the baby marrow, everything else here is going to complement it. Your olives that you've got here is going to add a lot of flavor. It's got a lot of saltiness to it, it's got a lot of tartness to it. It's cherry tomatoes, full of sugar. Once you put it to the heat, it's going to caramelize, it's going to add to the flavor there. Now I've got a little bit of goat's cheese here as well, which is going to like just cream it off nicely for us. So while the meat is cooking, I'm going to start plating the food now. Before I place that on, I'm going to take a little bit of goat's cheese at the bottom here. Put a little bit of aubergine or eggplant, top of that. Baby marrow on top of that. Some of the red pepper. So we've got a nice spectrum of colors there. Broccoli, so all these vegetables are nice and crunchy. which is what you want. All the flavor has been retained, nothing's been cooked away in water. So nice and nutritious and healthy. Meat is getting on, I'm going to turn that around. Add my cherry tomatoes to the dish. This is going to be part of my sauce, my olives. A little bit more butter. And then we're going to finish it off with some red wine. Then last but not least, fresh lemon. I know in South America, the people there like to put lemon with their meat, their red meats. Brings out the flavor. It's very good for you. That meat is ready now, so I'm going to take it out. Just put it on top of your vegetables there. Let that sauce finish cooking. A little bit more goat's cheese. And just to give it a nice bit of color, some red pepper. Then here's our sauce with its garnish. Just some red wine, olives, fresh cherry tomatoes. A little bit of garnish. And this is our beef fillet with the roasted red peppers, the broccoli, red wine tomato sauce.
Hello, my name is Jason Saul and this is Erica Saul, and welcome to ENN Network, the most informal news channel you've ever encountered in your life. We bring you stories that are related solely on the environment. We'll be bringing you interviews and current news events. We will never talk about terrorism unless it's environmental terrorism, which I expect is going to be an upcoming event in our near future, as people become more and more desperate to stop the madness that is kind of driving this world. There's maybe 2 or 3 really hot trending stories at the moment, intermixed with a bunch of aggregate stories. We're going to first talk a bit of local news. So on Monday, or was it Tuesday, sorry, the coal-fired power stations had their license for water suspended. Now, this water story is an ongoing, growing situation here in South Africa. Later in the week, a huge report came out in the Western Cape saying that the Western Cape is facing severe drought. This goes hand in hand with the events going up in the Northern Cape, hand in hand with the events going up in KZN. Water is becoming more and more scarce. The cycles that normally would replenish our supplies are changing in quite a dramatic fashion. Of interest, this is not just a localized event here to South Africa. You can actually see that this is starting to occur all over the world, which actually kind of links some of our international stories that are happening at the moment. So they were basically talking about the effects of climate change on amphibians, as well as the increase in copper content in all aquifers, so river aquifers. The study was done in Australia, but then confirmed again also to be happening in the States. They are seeing mass kind of deaths of most large amphibians. These are your toads, your frogs, and due to shifting weather patterns, too much heat, when they do find a source of water, the copper levels in the water make it no longer suitable for them to exist, and frogs are dying out in the numbers. And if that doesn't alarm you, then we have the exact same story coming through from a study that is done inside of the States. Basically, they've been picking up a lot of dolphin deaths. not just washed up dolphins, but washed up baby dolphins. And you know, the level and intensity and frequency of these kind of stories are becoming more and more and more commonplace. A study was done, and now you and I would think that this should be fairly common knowledge, but this study was so necessary, and it was completed, and the study basically highlighted that it is not possible for us to live or cohabit this planet with the focus of everything that we do focused on growth. So now that sounds kind of normal to me and you, but this study is what's going to be utilized to start to change law, to start to challenge companies, to start to challenge kind of reserve banks that always have a perpetual growth focus. They're always saying we must grow, we must grow, we must expand, populations must always climb. They panic about should a population start to descend. But the fact of the matter is that this growth is what is fueling this massive reliance on fossil fuels. Not only fossil fuels, it's fueling this massive pollution that we're doing, which is now, as you can see, impacting amphibians, impacting dolphins. And then just on Thursday, the report came out that it was impacting bees. So that they were trying to figure out what colony, why bees were kind of dying from colony collapse. And basically it's now proven that the increased temperature is affecting a primary, what did they call it, a bacteria that is found inside of the bees, and the bees are in fact starting to die out in their droves, not because necessarily environmental toxicity, which is your GMO stuff, Roundup, all that kind of stuff, but also because of shifting climate. Shifting climate is actually changing various different fungals and bacteria that the bees naturally have, which is a big problem. So now even Einstein said, you know, if you lose your bees, the world will end shortly thereafter, because bees are a key corner species. On Wednesday, a story came out about the impact of fin harvesting on sharks, and how it was decimating the oceans by wiping out apex predators. But then also the very next day, a story was released about how in Malaysia they are taking fishing and illegal fishing so seriously that they are confiscating boats and blowing them up to make reefs. And so far they were saying they've done something like 64 boats. They've confiscated off illegal fishermen, and they sink them. They don't ask questions. They don't, you know, there's no big court battles. They get the people off the boat. They drag the boat to their nearest reef, and they blow it up. And you're going to see more and more of this happening, because people are starting to realize the impact that we're having on the ocean. Now, let's not forget that this week is International Recycling Week. So obviously in that line you had a lot of stories coming out that are related to the levels of plastic in the oceans. You're having stories coming out in relation to the kind of lifespan that water from mining activities, from, you know, our impact is starting to show more and more now, and we're not talking about it. So what we're trying to do here is we're trying to talk about it, we're trying to bring it to your attention, and we're trying to make it viable for you.
Project would work, where they would come and negotiate, because they'd have an agenda. They want to come in here and they want to start a AIDS orphanage or something like that. They would go to the chief and they'd say to the chief, we want to start up an AIDS orphanage, and we want to try and employ some people and educate some people, and we want to take care of all your AIDS orphans, and for that we want some land. And the chief would think about it seriously, and he would feel important and say, yes, it's a good idea, we need these things. And there would be this trade-off, but in a way the project would then be beheld to the chief, whereas we kind of came through the back door here. Firstly, because I came in here with a preconceived idea that this whole tribal system or traditional system was flawed anyway, and it failed. So I came in here with kind of really a judgment against this whole traditional system and things like that, from what I'd heard, which is really unfair, but that's how I came in here. I sort of touched a little bit on what Contra Lesser, which is the concrete traditional leaders, was all about, and it looked dodgy. In a sense, it was quite rude. I should have gone to the great place of this specific council and said, I'm here to do this. Another thing was, having worked in the Transkei before, worked in many other countries in Africa as well, is that you sort of also believe in the bush telegraph. And I sort of thought, well, what I'm doing, if it's important enough, then somebody will hear about it and they'll come and find me and say, let's meet, sort of thing, which didn't happen. So either the bush telephone didn't get there, or I just haven't been doing enough important stuff really at that level. So what that did for the project anyway was, I think, was quite beneficial in that journey of understanding what these problems are all about, because we didn't have to work to anybody's agenda or had to deliver anything to anybody. While I was busy, not sure what I was really doing, just building this island in the middle of this place that I wasn't familiar with, having never been as close to the coast. I'd worked up in Ngcobo and places like that several years before. To put in a relatively self-sustainable place and hoping that people would just be flocked and would just feel there's some kind of magnetic pull to this place, and we could teach people how to eat and to respect water and soil, and building and things like that, and get their houses stronger, which was really naive of me, I think, in hindsight. I think people are used to being herded in a way, and they just didn't. So they thought, in order to engage with me, they'd have to pay me. In other words, if they want to come and make bricks, they'd have to pay me to do that, which was never in my mind, but I didn't articulate that very well, I think. So all this time I'm busy developing these gardens, I'm busy building these buildings, and sorting out these water issues and things like that. And at the same time, I'm watching it collapse around me on the greater scale, the municipality falling to pieces, the water systems falling to pieces, understanding how that's affected the whole dynamics of the community. Because I'm living inside this place and I'm seeing, and I've done this before in other places in other parts of Africa, but never with such a social dysfunctionality, which is what we've got here. So watching people's buildings fall down, and not jumping in these things and trying to save everybody, but just saying, well, tough. You don't, until you decide to integrate, it's what's going to happen. Of course, because what then, whether it was a good thing or a bad thing, but this main chief who was head of Contra Lesser, who I was working with, died, and left this huge void suddenly that we had started, which was about leadership. And he completely saw things the way that I saw things, of understanding that present leadership was flawed and had to be nurtured, and then to start focusing on the next leadership, the children, and to create leadership schools for these guys to come through so we can start to shift the whole thing around. Everything is based on oil.
Yeah.
Our monetary system, our judicial system, our education systems, everything on this table. Well, this is now second generation, so that's now no longer oil required. But that's our existence. Oil comes crash. I mean, we see it. I mean, yesterday, the Dow Jones fell another 3.5% yesterday. You look across the board, the American markets, it's just red. They just crashed. Oil organizations went down 4 to 5%. They're just coming crashing down, and it's happening every day. They're totally overinflated because they're based on where they think the oil reserves are, not where because everybody's overselling their oil. They're saying, oh no, we've got loads of it still, because they don't want to create panic. We're into these long wars now. I mean, when you've got a country like America that's a net importer of oil, when they produce, I think about 2 to 3, not even 2% probably anymore, of the world's oil. But they use 25% of the world's oil. I mean, they have to control the world. The economy is based on it. They have to control the world's oil, which means they have to be in war. Decision whatever we want to call them. There's all these words have been banning around, where there's so much evasive stuff comes in. But if you look at a forest that stands, each tree stands, and then as a collective, it's incredibly strong. It's a strong, healthy environment. And it's a three-dimensional living thing then. And if we can create that where people can stand strong on their own as individuals and then as a community, they're really, really strong. And they do things out of free will. Then we can shift the consciousness. But that goes against the religious beliefs, because that's all about codependency. I mean, you know, goodness, it's so disempowering. You know, it's very, I mean, there's this fellow who died for my sins. For goodness sakes, I'll die for my own sins. It's very disempowering, you know, and that's where it starts. And it's been so successful. It's indoctrinated in this. I mean, in these areas that I am in. I mean, this religion that's used here now. There's several versions of Christianity that are all over these areas that I'm in here. Unbelievable, the fear and the obsession with death, and the amount of resources that get put into death, and this dignity in death. But where's the dignity in life? And that's what we need to be focusing on. Is that every moment that we have this gift of living, and let's make it count. Let's be authentic. But we all put our belief in old mutual and funeral schemes for our death, so we can be remembered. But these guys who have these, they throw these huge parties. They spent their life beating their wives, abusing their children. But they had this incredible funeral, man. It was huge. You should have seen it. Strong Muti there. No. Disgraceful. Let's put that dignity into life now. And I really do believe that in this religion that existed before we came along with this whole sort of Christianity trip and things like that, was this incredible dynamic relationship between the earth and the people in Africa. You know, they call it Kwamata or something like that, and it's brilliant. It's so naive. It's brilliant because it's got counterbalance. It's just based in love and respect. And you know, if you respect the sun for rising, for setting, you respect the seasons. You show respect to the animal you kill to nurture yourself. You respect your spouse or your kids. Or, you know, suddenly here come these guys and saying, "No, hold on, you know, you guys are savages unless you bow down to this figure here. That's it. You're going to go and die a miserable death in hell and things like it." And how could people come here with anything but love anyway? Because that's all we believe in is love. Okay, so this is how people are building here. People without much means, which is called a wattle and daub. So here you got your wattle, which is your wooden framework, and they're packing in the daub, which is the clay, in here. Now, historically, this is a brilliant way to build. I mean, a lot of your Tudor houses in the United Kingdom, which have quite adverse weather, use this system. Okay, and they've lasted for hundreds and hundreds of years. This house won't last a year. Okay, and they have to redo it. What I'd like to propose that the way that this has been mixed, the way it's been mixed in, there's not much intention going into this. It shows a victim mentality within the people, because if this clay was worked through properly, in other words, it was kneaded like you knead bread, they put a bit of some dry grass in it, or some millie husks and things like that into it, it would create a stronger integrity in the bond, and it would last for years and years and years. But this has really just been put together very loosely, and there's not much love goes into this wall, and that's why we're using cements and things like that, because it's practical and it gives it longevity. Now, if you go into some of your sort of Central American, Santa Fe, those sort of areas, for them, which they use the adobe blocks, which is also just sort of sun-dried bricks, clay bricks. For them to come once a year, and the woman would come and they would repair the cracks, because they're also in very adverse dry conditions, where the bricks create wonderful insulation for their homes. It works really nicely for them. But for them, it's part of their cultural heritage. They celebrate the renewal every year, where they would fix up their cracks, they make big clay pits and create a render. That's part of who they are, and their yearly existence, their yearly rebirthing. Yeah, this is clay which we've got locally here. Now, it's quite a strong clay actually, prone to cracking, but it could be worked through a lot better. And this is fine. You fill this with your mix, okay, with a very little bit amount of water, and then you'll put this on it. And you'll push it down, which is your primary compaction. Alright, then take that over, and then this is where you'll notice the bottom is coming up.
Yes.
So it's compacting from the bottom. There's your compaction. Alright, so it's compacting up. Up it goes, and it pops the brick out, which should be up there now. 2 people could make a brick every 17 seconds.
Yeah.
But you get machines now that can do 12 bricks at once, doing the same. But the nice thing about it is that, as opposed to the machines that can make 1,500 bricks a day, there's a huge effect on the environment. Where you're actually getting, I mean, that's a hungry machine, and where you're getting that material from. Whereas this here, it's more hand. You can use the foundations of your building to build the walls up. It doesn't have to have such a negative effect on the environment. They're not fully set yet, so I don't want to mess with them too much. So it's 240 mils long, and it's 100 high, and it's 140 wide, which from an engineering perspective is perfect for a wall. You can support a roof with this lightweight roof, and it'll be fine. This is going to set for about 3 weeks. This digester, which I designed, it's a closed bag. Well, it's got an inlet and an outlet and a gas outlet. So it's made from reinforced PVC, which is the same material as you'll make a jumping castle from. And it's shaped. The shape of it is like a loaf of bread that's risen. So it has the convex top on it, and everything else is squared. It fits into this frame here that I just built with brick. And how it works is it comes from the toilets, the waste comes into the I can also feed it with green material, which produces most of, if I really want to get a lot of, push my my methane levels up, I'll feed it with some bananas or stuff like that, which boosts it. It comes in here, and inside here I have a live culture, which is anaerobic, which means that it exists without oxygen. Okay, so it's the digestion process is anaerobic as opposed to aerobic, which is like your composting loos and things like this. So the microbes that exist inside here break down the waste very, very efficiently, and the energy that comes out of that is the methane gas. Now, if you can smell, Judy, which it's almost a composty smell. There's not necessarily a sewage smell, but there's a slight composty smell. If you come close down here, you could almost smell the gas as well, which is when you burn it, there's no smell whatsoever. Again, it's a composty one. It's not necessarily unpleasant. We'll fill this with green material, with anything, and we'll just get some water and shove it down. It's a big stomach. That's how it really works. There's the enzymes that are breaking down the material inside there, and from that they create methane gas, and they create high nutrient water. Now there have been sort of many household biodigestion systems that are coming out. There are about 6 cubic meters prefabricated systems that cost probably about 35,000-40,000 rands, and they're not high gas yielding, but what they are doing is they're breaking down the water, the black water, the effluent water, which is really critical. And so therefore the principles are very much along these lines. This is just a bit more rudimentary. And so from here the water will go through a sand filter, which is what this is, which we've got. Obviously there's high nutrients in here. We've still got about 5 to 7% pathogens, which is your E. coli, etc., coming into here, which then these plant life will take it out. So it'll come into here, it will filtrate down through a slow sand filter. Underneath here, about a meter down, there's a hole, and it'll come up here, which this is full of shells like this, and charcoal, which then absorb the last remnants of pathogens. Okay, that's what this one, and the reeds, of course, as well, take out anything. So it's we really have removed as much. I mean, if there's anything left, it's absolute trace elements. The water will gather in here and settle, and then will slowly gravitate down through our trees and our orchards, which are down that side, which is high nutrient water, which you can drink. It'll give you a bit of a stomach ache because it's high in nutrients, but certainly nothing poisonous. And but it's very good for growth of the trees and plants. We've got coffee trees down there and a loquat tree, and we're definitely seeing pronounced growth as to the other trees that we have around here that are not enjoying these high nutrients that we're getting out of here. So ultimately what you'd like to have is say 3 or 4 houses together, all the waste leading into a digester, which then would lead into an orchard, oranges or whatever, which would then go to provide food for that house, provide the energy for the gas, as well as, most importantly in my mind, is processing the black water and not getting it into the waterways, which is critical. So we've got our dam over there where the water collects. All right, it's about 120,000 litres of water. We've got our fish inside there as well, which is a source of protein. And we feed the garden with that water as well, which then all slopes back into the dam slowly. From there the water is pumped up through to the storage tank, but it goes through a filtration process first, and then we can put in a solar pump to pump it up to our it's a 5,000 litre storage tank. The water is then, there's pipes going around down into the kitchen. From the kitchen it's processed through the food. The food is then processed through our bodies, which is then through the toilet, which then comes down through the digester, through the filtration, back into the gardens, and ultimately back into the dam. And it's a closed cycle, which we have now interrupted. We've taken from it, but now we've also put back the byproduct, which has helped our plant life growth, and it's given us energy. We're obviously going through transition now into winter, so we're getting our celeries going, our beetroots, carrots, things like that, lettuces, which this is quite a warm climate, so the lettuces don't always do that well in the hotter climates. We also do have some shade houses here as well to protect them through the summer. And what we're trying to do here is create a food forest where we've got our trees going, we've got bananas trees there, citrus trees going, we've got nut trees, avocado trees, pawpaws, as well as guava and coffee. We've got about 350 coffee trees in this space as well, which has got about another 3 years to go before they start producing. And then we've got climbing beans all over the place, which we're getting a huge amount of food from, plus our loofahs, which we eat when they're still young. And then we've got our pigeon peas as well, plus all our herbs and that. And then we go all the way down where we've got our ground covers. This is what we can call an aerated bed. It's off the ground. We've got green material at the very bottom, which is composting, and then we've got which is a long nutrient release bed, which is like a double dug bed, and then above it we've got layers where we've got decomposing materials at various stages, plus cow manure. That's very rich if you look at that. If we look around here, of course, sod's law, we won't find any, but there's worms everywhere as well that are working away. Perhaps if we look at one of the other ones. And then we cover that all up. Right now, because it's winter, we have quite a bit of dew, and this mulch here is holding that water, because we're in drought now, is holding that water on the ground. Plus the kind of growth here, we've got corianders and cresses, which are low on the ground and not using up too much of the precious nutrients. But this is where we have problems, where we have invasive plants like this guavadilla, which just comes on and takes over
But it does produce fruit that you eat.
It produces fruit, but it stops the oxygen from getting to these plants. So this needs to be managed a bit. In this garden here, we've got not just fruit that's for eating, but it's to attract other insects that eat aphids and things like that, like the marigold, which the scent, some of these invasive pests don't like the smell of, and it attracts other ones which then also eat other pests. So it's a very strong deterrent for an organic garden. There's a certain amount of weeds in here as well. If we look here, these are some weeds growing there. We allow that. We share the garden. We've got nice cloves growing as well, which is really good. On the sides here, we got roots creating networks, holding everything inside here. In this one here, we got mints, and we got some gooseberries over there. Smells lovely. If you're into that, and we can also put strawberries in some gardens at the bottom there. We've got strawberries holding the whole thing together. So we've got garden and garden. Yeah, peanuts here, which are coming good soon. In about 2 weeks' time we can harvest these. And carrots are coming right as well now. The seeds there, the marigolds are now going to seed, which I'll just distribute. Okay, so this is our dam, which already now we're a month and a half into the dry season, and we're seeing quite a bit of depletion of the water already. But last year we just managed to survive with it, but this year we've got more fish in it, so it's going to be interesting to see. Some of the fish are already at edible size. Just haven't worked out to catch the buggers yet. There's some turtles in here as well, frogs. So it's quite diverse. Turtles take out the small fish to try and keep the population down a bit. You can see that each rice has its own little, each grain of rice, there's a little sheath that exists in. Here's your grain of rice. Our food production has been up about 20 to 30% since we've had the bees here. We were getting some bees still before we put the hive here from the forest, but this hive is about 6-7 months old now and is very, very active. We've already put the second super on the top. So the super is where our honey lives. So the big box at the bottom is the bees' honey, where the queen lives, and then above there is where when that's full, they move up, and that's when we harvest our honey. So the middle one is now full, and the top one is half full now. And what we'll do is, as we go into winter now, the activity will be less and less, and we'll put on one more super, I think, and then we'll harvest the honey in the springtime. So now we're not just looking at some kind of one-dimensional garden. We're taking it to all different, and we're utilizing all of it, and we're rotating them all the time, and then also protecting them through the winter months. So it's just being conscious, but certainly there's a lot less energy is put into this garden as it develops more and more and more, and nature is allowed to do her thing, which is what's really exciting about it. And it truly, I do believe in about 2 years' time, it will be a food forest.
We have planted millions of seeds in minds and hearts that are sprouting consciousness around what we are doing, what we need to do, and how we can save ourselves from, as my good friend Kumi Naidoo, one of my heroes and the first African head of Greenpeace, says, we are sleepwalking into a disaster of unmitigated proportion, where our children and theirs will pay the price of our greed, our ignorance, and our inability to change. Yet people around the world are realizing this. If William Kamkwamba, a 14-year-old Malawian, can build a working wind turbine, first to power his own house and then eventually his whole village, then surely the rest of us can find some solutions. There's a fabulous book on this young man called The Boy Who Harnessed the Wind, and he's now an MIT student. China leading the way in the manufacture and installation of wind turbines. Nearly 3/4 of all of their clean energy investments are now wind. And in the United States, wind power has been the largest source of renewable electricity for the last several years. But there's also an incredible future for solar. The market is now growing at about 7 times the predicted pace. Did you know that every single hour, enough solar energy hits the Earth to meet the world's energy demands for a year? And here in South Africa, we have all of this available to us. And in North Africa, this ambitious supergrid hopes to take solar energy not just down to sub-Saharan Africa, but into Europe as well. Geothermal power plants, amazing. They harness the heat of the Earth to provide clean energy. And here, Iceland's leading the way. In China, every single person has to plant 3 trees every single year. And in India, massive school programs as we do here. The time for action is right now. So folks, whilst most of our governments are MIA and corporate greed continues to rape and pillage planet's resources and many slumber on unconsciously, can we here at Sustain Our Africa agree? We are the change agents, and together we can make the necessary changes to avoid more suffering so that we can have enough for all forever.
My name is Marcus Asner, and I'm a lawyer in New York. From 2000 to 2009, I was a federal prosecutor in Manhattan, and I prosecuted, among other things, the Arnold Benjes rock lobster and Patagonian toothfish case.
And in your country, do you get a lot of cases that are where the fisheries crimes?
We get some, and yes, we have a pretty robust enforcement network. The Lacey Act is really, I think, I'd like to say it's the envy of the world. And that
can you describe it?
Sure. What it is it makes it a crime. It does a number of things, but what it does is it makes it a crime to import into the United States fish, wildlife, and timber that's been harvested in violation of local law. And that local law can include the law of a foreign country, for example.
And James Benjes was prosecuted under that?
He was prosecuted under the Lacey Act, under conspiracy to violate the Lacey Act, and smuggling, and then smuggling is a substantive violation as well.
Okay. Do you find this is quite effective in preventing corruption in the States?
I wouldn't say it's so much effective in preventing corruption. I think what it is effective in doing is allowing us to use the federal criminal system to help prosecute and investigate instances where people are trying to take advantage of borders to import into areas things that have been harvested in violation of other jurisdictions' laws. And that itself is a very, very powerful tool.
Do you find, as a legal professional, is your main motivation because you enjoy the legality of it, and that, or is your main motivation that in this case you're actually doing something for the planet?
I think I'm probably shallower than all of that. When I was a prosecutor, I just wanted to go get the bad guys. And it didn't really matter to me whether it was a fish case or a narcotics case or a major white-collar fraud. I just liked pulling together the material, investigating the hell out of it, and taking down the bad guys.
Do you worry about what's happening to the planet, or doesn't it come past your door very often?
Yeah, I do worry about it. And look, I mean, I gave you a very shallow answer a moment ago. Of course I worry about it. And you know, one of the nice things about being a prosecutor, particularly in the United States and particularly in the Southern District of New York, is you really fundamentally believe that you wear the white hat and that your job is to protect those who need protection from bad guys. And in the instance of the Benjes case, we had the added advantage of really setting a precedent that does help protect the planet.
In 1988, that's when we had Bill Molson, the founder of permaculture, who came from Australia. He held a workshop in Botswana on permaculture, and 2 of our guys, who are now our trustees, went to attend the workshop. And then after the workshop, that's when they turned this farm into a training center. And their main focus was permaculture. Permaculture means permanent agriculture, but it can be defined in many ways. Some say it's an approach to designing system which will give sustainable rewards. Right now, as permaculture is growing up, we are now slowly getting into urban communities. We use natural resources for the production of our crops. Like for instance, for soil improving, we use this type of composting. We just harvest fresh cow dung, and then we put it in this container, we perforate it, and then put the dung in, and then introduce worms. After a period of 3 months, the worms will be doing the decomposition. They will be decomposing the stuff, and then after 3 months it will be ready. Then we take it and then put it in sieves. We mix with sand and then pot it. Then after those 3 months, the worms will be in abundance, and we could use them for feeding our poultry, and the extra we can take it for fishing or for fishing or for selling, or we could introduce them in the garden, because they will be in abundance. Nature is working for us.
Okay.
Sure. And then this system is called the container garden. It's ideal for those people who are residing in flats, who doesn't have where to do the cultivation. You just fill in an old sack with compost and a bit of soil. Then you perforate it and then you plant your vegetables. You're home and dry. And if you think of going for a holiday resort somewhere, you just take it and then put it at the back of your truck. Then you'll be having fresh vegetables with you. These are herbs. Herbs are used in various ways. Some are used for culinary, some has got medicinal properties, some are used as repellents if planted with vegetables. For instance, we have this one. It's called Nasturtium. Some use it as just a flower, but it has got more properties than just being a flower. We use it to deworm our livestock. It's very, very, very useful. And for human beings, if you have got upset stomach, take the flowers and then chew them, swallow the juice. If you have got eye ailments, you could just take the flowers and then you put them in boiling water, let it cool, and then bath your eyes. It helps a lot. Then we have celery. This one we use it as a repellent again if planted with the brassicas. And apart from that, on medicinal properties, it suppresses BP. One is suffering from BP. If he takes this one regular on his or her diet, it reduces BP.
What is BP?
Blood pressure.
Okay.
Blood pressure.
Celery.
Celery. And then this one is called thyme. Thyme, variegated thyme. This one is used for cooking, in fact. Apart from cooking, it has got many medicinal uses again. You could use it for whooping cough, you could use it for bronchitis, you could use it for headaches, or for boosting up one's immune system. If one, especially those, it could be AIDS victims, if they take this one, it helps them to boost their immune system. The lifespan will be a little bit prolonged if they take this one regular on their diet. It's very, very useful. Mint is in different varieties. We've got spearmint, we've got black mint, we've got peppermint. Right. It is used for sore throat. If somebody is suffering from sore throat, cold, flu, you could use this one. Just take it as herbal tea. Or if somebody is suffering from dizziness, you could just take a herbal tea of mint. It helps a lot. And then apart from that, if planted under fruit trees, it helps as a repellent of fruit flies. Plus, it's a very good soil binder. Wherever there is a little erosion taking place, if you plant it, it binds up the soil very well. That it reduces soil erosion. Called lemongrass. Lemon. Maybe the word lemongrass comes from that it has got a lemon flavor, and it smoothens the skin. Especially with the ladies, they like this one. Yeah. Acacia trees, they are termed as legumes. We use them in agroforestry, whereby we mix crops and trees. They are nitrogen fixers, and they are fodder. They can be used as windbreak. It doesn't shed the field. If planted with the crops tend to do very well. They can even grow very nice under these trees. They are very, very friendly.
Except for the thorns.
Sure. The group is the poor rural farmers who doesn't have enough cash maybe to buy these so-called barbed wires. One could resort to this type of tree. It's called Doviaris scapula. It makes a very good live fence if planted close. It develops thorns, and by so doing it inhibits goats, donkeys to enter in a field. Very, very useful. And apart from being a shield, it produces fruits which could be taken, and they're very, very nice, very rich in vitamin C. That's for eating. We have here is we have indigenous trees, be it indigenous fruit trees and then trees. And then we've got exotic trees, fruit trees and not fruit trees. And we have passion fruits and we have herbs. But generally, they are for generating income and improving sites within Fambizanai. Wherever we feel like there's bare land, we could just take them and then plant them to improve the site.
How does it improve the site?
Whenever a site is very bare, if you've got a massive downpour of rainfall, erosion takes place. But if you plant trees, the roots helps to bar the runoff and then let the water penetrate into the soil. And you could even introduce grass. You plant trees and then you plant grass. By so doing, erosion is minimized. That's how it improves the site. We plant our crops diversified. The reason being that we are trying to encourage a symbiosis friendship, whereby if you have got a nitrogen fixer, that nitrogen fixer will be fixing nitrogen, thereby benefiting the neighbor. It could be, in this case, it could be spinach. The nitrogen that is left by this bean is taken by the spinach, right? And at the same time, if you've got an outbreak of a certain disease, if that disease attacks spinach, at least you are left with beans. But if you've got just a field of spinach, if that disease comes, it wipes away everything and you are left with nothing. Those are the advantages of diversifying. And at the same time, we encourage farmers to cover the soil. The reason being that if the soil is covered, there is little runoff. And at the same time, there is much percolation. The temperature of the soil remains constant when the soil is covered. There is little evaporation. And at the same time, it decomposes as time goes by. It decomposes, and by so doing, it will be adding fertility into the soil.
So it's just grass?
You could use grass, you could use dead leaves, you could use live mulch, whatever you have. Because we are saying, it depends with the place you are. If you are in region 1, if you are in region 4, whatever you have there, make use of it. If you don't have even grass or leaves or whatever, you could use even stone mulching. But that one is ideal under fruit trees. You could use stone mulching.
So how many people are they working with?
Wind, like blight. So whenever you have a hedge in your garden, that disease could be trapped here and then doesn't get to your vegetables or crops or whatever. But this time of the year, it will become easy for one to spray. So we don't encourage farmers to leave trees growing high up. It will be very difficult for them to harvest. And at the same time, they end up having their kids having fractures because they climb up there, which is very, very much dangerous. So in the necessary course that we give, we train them that they should train their tree. A tree can behave in the way you want if you train it, but if you leave it, it will give you problems. So this is the result of training. The branches are growing sideways. It's very easy to harvest. You can even harvest when you are standing. You can even spray when you are standing. We make organic remedies. You could spray with hot pepper mixed with a bit of soap, or you could use tephrosia. Tephrosia is one of the most tree that we use here, which is more powerful on whatever pests. Be it bagrada bugs, be it grasshoppers, be it what, it's a sweeper, we call it a sweeper. And we use it as a last resort. Sure. So whenever we have an outbreak, we use that one. So we make what we call liquid manure. What we simply do is we find a container and then take fresh cow dung and then put it in a container, add a bit of water, and then leave it to stay for about 2 weeks. And then after 2 weeks, you sort of spear it. Yeah, that's organic farming. And then you take this stuff and then apply it on your crops. You dilute it 1:2 with fresh water, and then you apply it on your crops. But the most powerful one is the one made from chicken droppings. You just harvest the chicken droppings, you put in a sack, and then you put in a drum. You add water. You leave it for 2 weeks again, and then you top dress your crops. But with liquid manure, you go to dilute the one that is made from chicken droppings 1:5 because it's so powerful. If you don't dilute, otherwise everything will be burned. It's very, very powerful.
That's for the flies, hey?
Sure. This is what we call stone mulching. If you've got problems with chickens scratching at the base of a fruit tree, just put stone mulching and you are home and dry. And at the same time, it's acting as a habitat for lizards. Because in organic farming, we also need what we call predators. They help us in reducing the number of pests. So this is a home for lizards, beet snakes. Snakes are very good for controlling mice. So this is the ideal home for our predators. Be prepared for them. If you put fertilizer, yes, you get quick results, but the taste is awful. But if you use manure, it gives a wonderful taste. The taste is just perfect. Remedies on spraying is that whenever you have a customer or you have visitors during the night, you can pick up the leaves because you would have used chilies or hot pepper to do the spraying, which is something eatable. You can just wash that chilies and then you prepare for your customer or for your visitor. But if you use Roga or these synthetic chemicals, if it is 21 days before harvesting, you got to wait for those 21 days. But we are having problems because most of the rural farmers, they are money hungry, so they sometimes cheat. Rather than waiting for those 21 days, you could see him waiting for about 15 days and then start harvesting and then selling for the sake of money. But look what will happen. All those people who consume those vegetables will end up having problems just for the sake of money. But if you go organic, you could do spray and then at the same time harvest, no problem.
Fig tree.
It bears fruits and then the fruits turn red when they are ripe. By so doing, they attract birds. And then whenever we have birds in here, birds, rather than feeding on the figs, they could end up picking up pests. It could be butterflies, it could be grasshoppers, they end up picking them. So it's serving main functions here. It's a fruit tree and at the same time it's attracting birds. The birds in return will feed on pests. This is called yarrow. It's a herb. It's called yarrow. Yarrow is a very good plant if mixed with the brassicas because it produces a certain odor which is not liked by pests. So it will be acting as a repellent here. And at the same time, it's a painkiller. If somebody is suffering from anything, you could just take a herbal tea of it and then it eases the pain. It's very good again on bleeding. If somebody is bleeding, you just rub the leaves and then put them on that wound. Automatically the blood will clot. It promotes clotting of the blood. However, they cannot pass through the roots because of the smell it gives. It's not liked by moles. So it's a repeller of moles. The connection of the ecosystem, they'll be seeing everything. So they prefer using these outdoor classrooms. Closely, we build what you call a chicken tractor. It's just a small wooden thing with a bit of fence so that we keep the chickens at one place and then we put the chickens in. The chickens will scratch, that is picking whatever pest they could find. And at the same time, they'll be dropping their droppings, that is fertilizing the soil, and then weeding, the grazing or the taking of the whatever is growing there. That's fine for us. So after a period of maybe 2 weeks, we move it, put it in another place, we plant something there. It means that place is pest-free, it's manured, and it's weeded or it's cultivated already. And that's how we use chickens in the system of permaculture. Then we come to biogas. We encourage farmers to use these biogases in rural areas as a way of getting fuel. Because after independence, most of the farmers, the rural farmers, they went on a rampage of destroying the environment, having piles and piles of firewood, forgetting that tomorrow they won't have anything to resort on. So we are coming on with this project of biogases, whereby they could use fresh cow dung, feed in, and then get methane gas, then use it for cooking and lighting as well.
So there's methane coming out of that tube?
Yeah, sure. Take it as celery. It could be used as liquid manure. Then we take the waste and then we apply it on crops as liquid manure. So in permaculture we don't throw away anything. We make use of everything. Yeah, sure. Make use of everything.
Beautiful Easter.
We have cattle. Those are the ones that does the grazing. And then we have pigs. We used to have goats. We just buy them and then fatten them and then sell them as a way of generating income. We harvest seeds from the fields, be it in the garden, be it in the fields, seeds of trees, seeds of vegetables. We bring them in here, we store them there, and then we could sell them to our visitors or customers. And then the extra we could replant it in the garden so that we become self-reliant. We are promoting self-reliance. We have courses that runs for 1 week, and then some runs for 2 weeks. And these bricks are called the SSBs, soil stabilized blocks. They've got a cement element in them, and they can last for a long time. They are very cheap to produce. And they can stay for a long time as long as they don't get wet. But even if they get wet, because of the properties of cement that is inside, they become much stronger. And as I said earlier on, that our target group is the poor rural farmer. If you look at our structures, they are made in a way that even the rural farmer can afford. Look at the ceiling. It's made.
This here, huh?
Yes, these are people's houses. This is just a model village whereby we are trying to show the farmers how they can set up their homes or their houses. We have the bedroom facing the northern hemisphere. It's because the sun here in Zimbabwe, it follows this direction. So if you build a house this way, it means only one room is going to get enough sunlight. The rest it will be dark. So if you build it this way, at least all rooms will get enough sunlight. And at the same time, water that is harvested from there is diverted again into that pit. The whole system is called the pit bed. All the kitchen waste are thrown in there, and then with the help of the water that is harvested from the roof into there, it decomposes quickly, and then after that it will be manure. Then we retake the manure and then reapply on beds.
How does the water get there? Through the gutters?
Through this drain.
All angles.
Then the water that is harvested from that bedroom goes through the gutters into that tank. Unfortunately, we are not using the tank so far. Then you could use that water for washing your clothes or your plates.
And what about drinking water?
Drinking water, we get it from an electric borehole. It's somewhere there. And then as for soil preparation, we also have this herb here. It's called the stinging nettle. Stinging nettle. We use this one to make liquid manure. Earlier on I said you can make liquid manure out of chicken droppings or fresh cow dung. But if you don't have all those, you could resort to this one. This one or Russian camphor. It's very, very rich in potassium, very rich in nitrogen. What you simply do is you harvest the leaves, you put them in a container. Then due to fermentation, it decomposes. The liquid that you get is what we term liquid manure. And you can dilute it with fresh water, 1:1. And then you apply on your crops. Apart from making liquid manure, it's a very good suppressor of sugar diabetes. If somebody is sugar diabetic, you could resort to this one. Just make a herbal tea, and then you put a bit of honey, then you take it. It suppresses the disease. Blood poisoning, it also helps. And again, it's a repellent of snakes. Those who are in Zimbabwe who are living in region 4-5, there are lots of snakes. So you can just make a small jura of this one, because snakes doesn't penetrate on it. Maybe it's because of the spikes over there. It doesn't like snakes, and you could hardly find one crossing this one. So it's a very good repellent of snakes. We don't believe in plowing because if you turn up the soil, after 5-6 years the soil becomes exhausted. It quickly becomes exhausted. Maybe what we encourage is we can do plowing maybe on staggering years. Maybe after 3 years you plow, after 3 years you plow. Or on these other years you could practice what we call minimum tillage, where there is little disturbance of the soil, so that the soil will remain intact. Holds the building materials. This one is called the rope and washer pump. Just maybe a simple borehole that is a bit advanced. It sucks water from the permanent water table using this rope. This rope has got washers. These washers. And these washers are at every 75 interval. So it rotates into the water table. Then it comes out through this PVC pipe. The volume of the PVC pipe is just similarly the same with the size of the washers. So whenever it sucks water from the water table, that water eventually comes out as you'll be rotating. It's working.
That's pure water, huh?
Yes, that's pure water.
That's absolutely fantastic, man. Jeez, you guys are so clever.
Yeah.
G'day, my name is Brian. I'm the chef at Monkey Valley Resort. Today we're going to do some healthy, pure, organic and free-range food. We're going to be focusing on stuff that is sustainable for the planet. First dish I'm going to do is called pawpaw, roasted pawpaw and walnut relish. Walnuts has got a lot of protein in it. It's also got a lot of sterols and sterolins, which is good for your immune system. So we're going to make something with that. It doesn't require a lot of cooking. Pawpaw is going to go into the pan for like 5 minutes, and the rest of the stuff is quite raw, and it's easy to make and it's quite tasty. So the first thing I'm going to do is the walnut relish. So you just take a couple of walnuts, just chop it up roughly. Let's throw that into the mixing bowl. A little bit of cinnamon, which is quite good for you, also good for the immune system. Some honey, and then some balsamic vinegar, and some fresh coriander. Coriander has got a very earthy sort of smell to it and a very earthy taste, and it's also quite good for your health. Nice green color, just roughly. Just mix it all in there. And that's more or less the relish finished now. So now we're going to focus on preparing the pawpaw. Just going to peel that. This is quite a big pawpaw. I'm sure you can get smaller pawpaws than this. It's massive. So you just need a little bit of that. I'm just going to cut it there. And then cut it in half. Just going to have to remove these. I'm just going to go back into the kitchen, cook this pawpaw, and I'm going to come plate it. Right, so I've gone back, I've gone to the kitchen, cooked the pawpaw, I've just come back, caramelized it, got the natural sugars in the pawpaw to caramelize and give a nice little flavor. I haven't cooked the pawpaw much, so a lot of the nutrients remains in the pawpaw, so it's quite healthy, and it just gives it that little bit of caramelization, that little bit of caramel sort of taste to the pawpaw, which makes the dish quite interesting. So now we're going to plate it. One small little piece of pawpaw is more than enough for a light lunch. Put your pawpaw in the middle of the plate. Then we're going to take some of the relish and just scoop it on top. Just give that a nice stir and just place it nice on top. So you got a soft little pawpaw, sweet little natural fruity flavor, and you got the crunchiness of the nuts. You got tomato in there, you got some honey in there. So everything in here is extremely good for you. There you go, guys, natural food, nicely plated, light lunch. Bon appetit.
I'm Ben Margolis with the Global Call to Action Against Poverty, the world's largest anti-poverty movement. And we're here because we're calling on delegates at the conference to really take urgent action on climate change, because we see our constituents all over the world see that today and not tomorrow people are being affected by climate change, people are dying because of the impacts of climate change. And we're hoping that from this conference we get some real agreements from the world's leaders on several measures, specifically on adaptation and on more funding for adaptation above and beyond the 0.7% aid commitments already. Also on deforestation, and really importantly on negotiations around the post-Kyoto Protocol, and making sure that those negotiations, the world's poorest countries' voices are heard, and that the world's richest countries take the responsibility for historic carbon emissions, take that into account when agreeing the post-Kyoto framework for tackling climate change. So we really hope that at the end of this meeting we don't just see another talking shop where people come together and they agree that this is a huge problem, but that they actually agree it's a huge problem and put in place some of the measures needed to tackle it really urgently.
Would you prefer that this conference was about cutting out the use of fossil fuel instead of reducing emissions?
It's got to be based on what works for countries all over the world. I think it's very nice to say that we'd like to see a complete cutting of fossil fuels, and I think in an ideal world that is what we'd be looking for. But in reality, for many of the world's poorest countries, their economies rely heavily on fossil fuels still. So for example, in Timor-Leste and East Timor, 82% of GDP to that country is from their oil reserves. So it's very difficult to say at this stage completely cut fossil fuels, because for such a poor country that would have a devastating impact on the world's poor. So I think what's really important is that the world's richest governments really invest money in technology transfer, in renewable energy sources, so that countries like Timor-Leste and others can start to move away from an oil-based economy to a renewable energy economy. What the impact would be if you stop deforestation?
Yes.
How do you mean? You just explain.
Well, at the moment they're just talking about cutting down the emissions from deforestation.
From deforestation.
Carry on burning it, carry on getting rid of it, but cut down the amount of smoke that's coming out of it.
Yeah. The forests provide an absolutely vital source of livelihood for so many of the poorest people in the world. And I was recently in India and working with some forest user groups in India, and also with Nepal with a fabulous organisation called FECA, which is the Federation of Forest Users in Nepal. And actually what they have found they've been able to do is to continue to use the forest as a source of livelihood, but for the community to take ownership of that forest. So actually they are reforesting the area and using it in not just a sustainable way, but actually a way which is reforesting and not deforesting the area. So they're still able to gain the livelihood from that, but they're actually increasing the size of forest at the same time. And what they're finding, especially in Nepal, is as they are regrowing the forest, then the knock-on impact is fabulous in terms of less flooding, in terms of more wood for fuel and so many other things. The big problem with deforestation is in areas where the forest is no longer owned and used by the community, and where large businesses have ownership and access to the land, and then the use of the forest is seen purely as an economic factor. So the use of the forest has to be seen as a benefit for the community which is living with that forest, or as a benefit for the wider community as a whole, as in the global world, which relies on the forest as a carbon sink and so many other things. So actually I think there are ways to continue for the forest to be seen as a livelihood for so many poor communities living in forest areas, but actually to reforest the area at the same time.
There was two pieces of good news that I really liked. Caltech came out with release oxygen. This is very well known. But what they didn't know is what happened to the carbon dioxide. And trees, being the most beautiful, amongst the most beautiful of creatures, turns out that trees actually share the carbon dioxide with each other. So if there is a tree that doesn't have sufficient carbon dioxide, not only will the tree pass it to that tree, so if it wasn't good at generating enough energy for it, it will share it with its tree. But most important is that it's interspecies. So a tree won't only share with a tree from the same species. A tree will actually share with any species requiring carbon. And it just goes to show you how beautiful that thing is. It's beautiful because they actually take the, they care. A little weird, but the implications are extreme. So it's almost like something from the science fiction world, where you're able to point at an object, move a brick. There's those big conspiracy theories about how the pyramids were built and how they managed to move those big blocks. Well, maybe, just maybe, you're looking at a technology that is going to be capable of doing that.
On the local basis, you have what are known as health cities. 100 French cities are part of that network. Of course, 100 cities may not be enough, but it's already a start to prevent additional greenhouse gas emissions by a development of what is known as active mobilities, meaning people walking or cycling to work instead of using cars or public transportation. So you can see it, ladies and gentlemen, we are conducting this struggle on every front. Here in France, but all around Europe. But what is required now is coordination between such efforts worldwide, and we need to have a clear framework. We need to have indicators so as to assess the effectiveness.
Of introducing Dr. Shoshana Jakob, our regional director, and before becoming the regional director, Dr. Jakob served as the founding director of the European Union's European Centre for Disease Prevention and Control, and has held a number of high-profile national and international public health policy positions in the last 3 decades.
Your Serene Highness, Prince Albert, Madame Ségolène Neuville, Secretaries of State, Heads of Agencies, outstanding scientists, dear colleagues, friends, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, let me start by repeating what our Director General Margaret Chan said yesterday in a similar event here. She said that climate change is a defining issue of the 21st century. It is a very important issue in the new development agenda, and this is a decisive moment for all of us. Governments and countries of the world are here together to finalize a universal and credible agreement with strong commitments to stop further deterioration of the change of our climate. This is critical to public health. We hope to see a strong people perspective and the public health perspective in this agreement, and of course all the mitigation measures will have very strong co-benefits for health. The fight against climate change is more than just an environmental question. These were the words of the Honorable Minister Fabius, who was opening the conference. It is essential for nourishing our people, water on earth, safeguard biodiversity, protect our health, fight against poverty and massive migration, avoiding war and encourage peace, and giving a chance to development. Climate change has a serious adverse impact on human health, on economic prosperity, on political stability and societal productivity. And Europe is not spared. 70,000 deaths occurred in 12 European countries in 2003 as a result of the heat wave. It was this country which faced the highest consequences. Several thousands of people died within a week. Hospitals and mortuaries were overcrowded. health professionals had no cure. Some of the dead persons were found days or even weeks later, highlighting some of the social dilemmas of our time. Experts anticipate that more of this is to come. The good news is that this agreement could potentially save many lives worldwide. Investments in low carbon development, clean renewable energy and greater climate resilience are also investments in better health. Let me give you a few examples. Measures that reduce air pollution as well as non-CO2 air pollutants such as black carbon can reduce the 7 million deaths globally and the around 600,000 deaths in the WHO European region. A reform of global energy subsidies could reduce carbon dioxide emissions by more than 20%, cut premature air pollution death by more than half, and raise government rights an ideal platform. It brings together the Ministers of Health and Environment of the 53 European member states. It generated a protocol on water and health, action on transboundary air pollution, and pan-European initiative on transport, environment and health, what we call the PEP, and 3 ministerial declarations calling for further action on climate change and health. More recently, the Working Group on Health and Climate Change was created. As a result, 32 countries examined their vulnerability to climate change-related health threats, and 24 developed already adaptation strategies and plans, including health. Whilst most countries in the region took action to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, also reflected in the INDCs, more needs to be done to capitalize on the health co-benefits of energy, transport, buildings, and agriculture. Ladies and gentlemen, let me also reassure you that we in WHO are doing our part.
And we hope that the Paris Agreement is going to give us an even stronger mandate for action together. For our keynote presentation, I have the honor of introducing Professor Sir David King. Sir David was appointed as the UK Foreign Secretary's Special Representative for Climate Change in September 2013, and has previously worked with Prime Ministers Tony Blair and Gordon Brown as the government's Chief Scientific Advisor. He has been instrumental in raising awareness of the need for governments to act on climate change.
It's a privilege to be here with you, and it's a very, very important topic that I'll be addressing. I'm going to start with what I think is Europe's biggest single natural disaster measured in terms of the number of fatalities. And that was the hot summer of 2003. The best estimate of the number of people who lost their lives across Europe in that hot summer is 65 to 70,000. It was an enormous loss of life. It's not recorded as a natural disaster because, unlike a tsunami, it happened over months or a month and a half rather than over a day. But nevertheless, in terms of the number of people who were lost in that disaster, it was enormous. Now, the question I'm addressing here is, what is the impact of climate change on human health? And I'm now going to suggest to you that that disaster was the first direct climate change implicated disaster. So what I'm showing you here is as a function of time going back to the year 1900, the average Central European summer temperature. The black is the measurements, and the red is the theoretical analysis provided by the British Met Office to me in that year 2003, where there's a black line that comes up to a cross. That's that extraordinarily hot summer in 2003. Now, I hope what you can see from that is that it was well in excess of the previous hot summer in Central Europe on record, 1947. That spike in 1947. And then in red, what you see is the Met Office's theoretical model. And that theoretical model from the UK Met Office is essentially from our world analysis of the weather. It's an enormous amount of data, an enormous computer program. It is reinitiated every 6 hours from data gathered from satellites and from commercial aircraft around the world, every 6 hours. And we predict the weather for the world tomorrow. And we also predict climate change for the world in 80 to 100 years' time. So this model includes greenhouse gases. And I simply asked the Met Office to run the model backwards in time, first of all, to see, and I was asking them in 2003, to see to what extent we could trust the calculations. And you'll see that the red indicates that this doesn't give a bad description at all of the change in the Central European average summer temperature going back to the year 1900. What, of course, it doesn't show is that we can predict the weather. The weather is the spikes going up and down over that length of time. The weather prediction is pretty good for tomorrow, and it gets worse and worse as we go forward. And so what I also asked them to do was to reinitiate their program over a 6-week period. And so what you see in the different red curves is the up and down of the weather as predicted, and the overall trend is what we are now calling climate change. Now I asked them to run the program forward in time, and you can then see that, you can then see if you glance across that by 2050, on a not business as usual, a medium to high emission scenario, which we're currently on, we will have reached as an average temperature in Central Europe the same as that extraordinarily hot summer in 2003. And that to me summarizes the enormous risk we are faced with from climate change. Each and every population around the world is fully acclimatized to their historical climate. We would never have had that number of fatalities if people had been acclimatized to the average climate. But that rising background signifies the challenge that we're faced with. When we get an extremely hot summer in 2050 or thereabouts, that'll be a spike but sitting above a much higher baseline temperature. There's the challenge. And you will see from this that we need to be, in the shortest possible time, decarbonizing the global economy. And that's what this meeting here in Paris is aiming to do. Now, was that a curious event? Of course, we always have extreme weather events. Those upward spikes indicate that in the black curve. But let me just then take you to the next slide, which shows you that hot summer on the left in Central Europe in 2003, and then in July 2010, that awfully hot summer that the Russians around Moscow suffered. And you will see that the Moscow temperature was considerably in excess of that we experienced in Central Europe. And that's the kind of challenge that we are faced with in terms of the human capability to survive going forward. When I was Chief Scientific Advisor, what I had to do was worry about the low probability events, which these extreme events are, with a high impact. And a low probability event might be an event up to 1%, but if the impact was a severe loss of human lives, then we had to act. So for example, H5N1 flu, when it developed in sectors of the avian population, the question arose whether it could transmute into a virus that would become a human-to-human avian flu virus. And since human beings have no protection against H5N1, the outcome would be severe. So I had to get together a group of biologists to first of all give me an indicator of what the percentage chance of that transmutation was. And they said over 10 to 20 years it might be 1%. That's in my danger zone. Then I said to epidemiologists, if this transmutation happens anywhere in the world, how long before it arrives in Britain? And it's amazingly quick because air flights are the best means of transporting a virus of this kind. And after that, what would Britain's population impact be 6 months later? And the answer was between 500,000 and 1 million fatalities, 500,000 to 1 million deaths in just the first 6 months of this flu outbreak. So what I did was then go to a major pharmaceutical company based in Britain. I won't advertise which one. And I simply said, what would it cost to develop a vaccine against the avian H5N1 virus? They gave me a very large number, and I took it to the Prime Minister and the Cabinet, and they agreed right away that we should develop the vaccine and vaccinate the British population up to about 80% of the population, which we did. All right, so now I take climate change, and as I moved into the Foreign Office, decided I would start a new exercise. And that exercise was not to say, what is the average impact from climate change likely to be going into the future, but what are the 1% impacts, and what would the outcome be of those impacts? And what I did was simply put together a team of about 120 political advisors, high-level politicians, people from the security sector, admirals and generals from the United States, India, China, and Britain. And we worked for about a year, and we had meetings in each country. And the outcome has been published. It's available on a website. It's a risk assessment of climate change. Now, a risk assessment is taking an insurance/reinsurance approach to climate change, which frankly has never been done before. And this is like saying to somebody, do you have insurance against your house burning down? And everyone would say, of course I do. Do you expect your house to be burnt down? Absolutely not. But the outcome is so severe that you take out an insurance policy. So this is what we were doing here. And so what we did was ask, for example, very high-placed Chinese experts, what is the biggest challenge that your country is faced with? What could climate change throw at you? And they came up with 3 things, and I'm just going to run through our analyses of the risk of each of those occurring going forward in time. And the first was complete failure of the 3 major rice crops in China in 1 year. If I could have the next slide, we see that, I'm sorry that the yellow curve doesn't come up too well, but these are the different crop varieties, and the temperature rise, local temperature rise, is shown along the bottom curve there, and the local temperature rise above today's level, let me stress. That's not using the pre-industrial level. And you'll see that as the temperature rise even goes to 0.5 degree or 1 degree, the risk of failure of the rice crop in China that would be devastating for the population is already approaching 1%. That's a major risk for a population to take. But let me stress, this is just one impact, because climate change is driving impacts all through together. As the temperature rises to 2-3 degrees centigrade, any biologist would know a rice plant as it flowers is very sensitive to excessive temperature, and if the temperature rises above 34 degrees centigrade, it doesn't produce the rice fruit. Right? So that in any 1 year, we're approaching 60%, 70% chance of this happening. Now, obviously, this is a fatal prediction for many societies. Please look, I'm looking here in blue at northern India, in orange at southeast China, and in green at southeast United States of America. Fatalities for people without air conditioning would be in hundreds of thousands with this sort of situation. One of the biggest risks is, of course, from rising sea levels. The British Isles is a particular situation. Every island nation is faced with this. When there are storms at sea, we have storms inland as well. It means our rivers are swollen and flooded at the same time as we get attacks around the coastline. And the cities, 80% of the world's major cities are based on coastlines, are under severe risk of flooding during those extreme weather events. And what we're showing here is the number of events per 100 years that would occur in Calcutta, Shanghai, and New York. And you can see from the figures showing Calcutta, by the time you get to 100 per 100 years, it's saying Calcutta will flood every single year on average. And this curve rises well above that level. The sea level rises are between 0 and 1 meter on this curve. The very cautious prediction is that we will be approaching 0.4 to 0.5 meters by the end of the century. That's not taking into account feedback effects that are already being observed on Greenland. So as we go forward, actually, it's clear that Calcutta is not a city that can house people as we go forward above sea levels rises of 0.5 meters or so. We published this, as I said, in June, and some of you may be aware of the very severe floods suffered in Calcutta shortly after we published this paper. If you follow that green curve back in time, you'll see that it's a non-zero probability of happening. The severe floods of cities around the world is happening at the same time as these other challenges. But then let me go back to food production in China and the dependence on rice as a crop. The biggest rice paddy fields in the world are in the Vietnam Delta. And that delta is going to become salinated as sea levels rise, particularly when there are storms at sea. And we will lose the rice crop from the biggest rice crops in the world, and that will be a loss that will not be regained. So we're looking at severe challenges to the global economy going forward in time. What is the probability? I was asked to talk about less than 2 degrees centigrade. What's the probability going forward in time that the temperature will stay below 2 degrees centigrade? These different curves are the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, different scenarios going forward. The best case scenario, and we've got to work like hell, if I may say that, to get on the best case scenario, is the dark blue. And you'll see that the dark blue is saying that even as we get to 2030, there is a very good chance that we will exceed a pale blue curve as we move forward from this meeting, or the dark blue. But let me just remind you, we cannot predict that that'll be certain to keep us even below that 4 degree level, which I'm saying is going to be devastating. The conclusion from the University College London Lancet Commission report, that joint study, which came out about the same time as our risk assessment analysis, is shown here. Climate change is the greatest global health threat of the 21st century. I hope you understand. I believe that climate change is a threat to our global civilization. Our economic system cannot survive the kind of threats we've understood from this analysis. Thank you very much.
I think it brings home once again why we're here today, what we need to do when we go back, and the disastrous consequences if we do not carbonize our economy in the shortest time possible.
Our focus is on wildlife traders. That is our niche. We do terrestrial and marine species. I've been in traffic for 15 plus years now. And for the majority of that time, my work has been focused on marine resource trade. I'm based in Cape Town, so for much of that time, and collaborated really quite extensively, not only with DAF, as you would have heard from Bernie. That wasn't a setup. Bernie referring to traffic. We've had the most wonderful collaboration with Bernie and many of his colleagues over the last 10 or more years. Just last week, we ran a fisheries data analysis training program with about 20 DAF officials, and really pleased to see quite a number of them are at the symposium as well. The collaboration mentioned a number of times already, and ours is a good example of the way in which an NGO can work with government agencies. So, a very simple presentation really for me today. I'm going to be talking about the challenges that are faced with seafood trade, and goes into the retail restaurant system and then is bought by a consumer and is eaten. And you've got systems at each point in that trade chain for monitoring. If we've got a control measure that can be enforced, we have an opportunity to disrupt. And I think if we just reflect on that pyramid that Yves showed yesterday, the more opportunities for disrupting illegal catch and trade, I think the higher we can get in that pyramid and the just attitudes and behavior. So you also have fisheries control officers, enforcement officials playing a role through the trade chain. They will check, for instance, processing establishments, check invoices, permits, and so on at various stages. In some cases, but not